Hey friend, I'm here to help you relax and sleep tonight. The channel is going through a difficult time and I really need your support. The encourage button is very important. You can find it below the video next to the like and subscribe buttons. Click it now. Every click helps this video reach new people. Your likes and comments are also very important. Even a simple word or the time you watch the video makes a big difference. Please click the encourage button. Hit like. Leave a comment. Anything at all. Your support makes a real difference and helps this video reach people who need it. Thank you so much for your time and support. The wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes. That's the first lesson you learn as a park ranger at Crater Lake National Park. The second, some things in these woods defy explanation. I've served as a federal park ranger for nearly a decade, patrolling one of Oregon's most stunning natural wonders. The deepest lake in the United States sits in the caldera of an ancient volcano, surrounded by forests that hide secrets older than human memory. My name is Wade Braining, and what I'm about to share happened 3 years ago, though it feels like yesterday when the night terrors come. Growing up in Saginaw, Michigan, I was always the kid who disappeared at dawn and returned mud-splattered at dusk. While other teenagers huddled around television screens, I tracked deer through northern forests and cast lines into glass-clear lakes. My father, a factory worker with calloused hands and a quiet reverence for nature, taught me how to read the wilderness like a book written just for us. When he died during my sophomore year of college, I abandoned my business degree and transferred to a natural resources program. 6 months after graduation, I pinned on my first ranger badge. Crater Lake became my home after postings in Yellowstone and Olympic National Parks. The place spoke to me, the perfect circular lake with its impossible blue depths, the surrounding pines standing sentinel, the silence that felt alive at dawn. I rented a cabin 20 minutes from the park entrance, decorated sparingly with fishing trophies and photographs of mountains I'd summited. My life had a simplicity I cherished. The changing seasons, weekend beers with fellow rangers, occasional dates with locals that rarely led anywhere lasting. The wilderness was my most faithful companion. That autumn unfolded like many before it. Tourist crowds thinned as temperatures dropped, leaving the park to dedicated hikers and photographers capturing the foliage. Maintenance crews prepared trails for winter, and rangers like me settled into the quieter rhythms of off-season patrol. The particular Tuesday when everything changed arrived with a spectacular sunrise that painted Mount Scott in gold and crimson. I remember thinking it looked like the mountain was bleeding into the sky. "Morning, Wade. Looking poetic today," said Marcy Hammond, our dispatch operator, as I signed in at headquarters. Her gray hair was pulled into its usual neat bun, fingers flying over keyboard keys as she coordinated the day's assignments. "Just appreciating the view," I replied, pouring coffee into my thermos. "Forecast still showing clear skies. Till Thursday. Then we've got that system coming through. They're saying possible snow above 7,000 feet. I nodded, checking my pack for the standard gear. First aid kit, multi-tool, emergency rations, flares, radio, maps, compass, and the .tot 40 caliber Glock we carried for predator defense. While violent crime was rare in the park, the occasional aggressive bear or mountain lion necessitated preparation. If only that had been the worst threat awaiting us in those woods. Cody Hayes arrived as I was heading out, his lanky frame filling the doorway. 5 years my junior at 30, Cody possessed an uncanny spatial awareness that made him our best search and rescue operative. He'd grown up in eastern Oregon, hunting and tracking with his grandfather, a member of the Umatilla tribe. Unlike my methodical approach, Cody operated on instinct, claiming he could feel when someone was lost nearby. "There he is," Cody grinned, slapping my shoulder. "Ready for another exciting day of telling tourists not to feed squirrels and rescuing unprepared hikers wearing flip-flops?" "Living the dream," I replied, returning his smile. "East Rim Patrol today?" "Yep. You're taking north, right? Bet you a beer I find more violations than you." "Not taking that bet. Last time you found 10 improper food storage situations in one afternoon." "Not my fault bears find me fascinating," Cody laughed, grabbing his own gear. "Seriously though, something feels off today." I paused. "What kind of off?" He shrugged, his expression momentarily uncertain. "Don't know. Just woke up with this feeling in my gut, like something's watching the park. Maybe cut back on the ghost stories around the campfire," I suggested, though Cody's intuition had saved lives before. "Yeah, probably nothing. Hey, still on for the Blazers game tonight? As long as we don't have any late calls, meet at Thunder Brewing at 7. We confirmed plans and headed to our separate vehicles, Cody in his Forest Service green Jeep, me in my matching Ford Ranger. The park was quiet that morning, dew glistening on spider webs stretched between pine branches. I checked the standard trouble spots, overlooks where visitors ignored barriers for photographs, trailheads where hikers sometimes left trash. By noon I'd cited 2 improper food storage violations and helped a family with a flat tire. I hiked part of the Pacific Crest Trail where it crossed the park, enjoying the solitude. Something about Cody's uneasiness lingered, though. I found myself scanning the tree line more frequently, pausing to listen when the forest felt too quiet. Around 12:30 I stopped at Lightning Springs to eat my sandwich, sitting on a mossy log while chickadees darted through branches overhead. That's when I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing. The constant whisper of wind through pine needles had ceased. I stood slowly, hand moving toward my sidearm. Nothing moved in the undergrowth. No sound but my own breathing. Then, 20 yards away, a deer burst from the brush, eyes wide with terror, and bounded across the clearing without acknowledging my presence. Running from what? My radio crackled, shattering the silence. "Wade, you copy?" It was Marcy from dispatch, her usually calm voice edged with urgency. "Go ahead, Marcy. We've got a situation. Visitor Center just got a call from Paul Croft. His wife Janet went hiking on East Rim Trail this morning. Supposed to check in by 11. No call, no answer on her cell. He's pretty worked up." I glanced at my watch. 12:47. Less than 2 hours overdue. Normally not cause for immediate alarm, but something about this made my skin prickle. "I'm about 30 minutes from East Rim. Is Cody in the area?" "Already there. He's starting from Pemis Point working south. Can you come in from the north end?" "On my way." I packed quickly and jogged back to my vehicle. As I drove toward East Rim, dark clouds gathered over Mount Scott, contradicting the clear forecast. The temperature dropped several degrees in minutes. My windshield fogged, and I cracked the window, letting in air that smelled of pine resin and something else, something metallic, like blood or ozone before lightning strikes. I reached the North Junction parking area and grabbed my search gear, adding extra water and a thermal blanket. Most lost hikers were simply delayed by taking wrong turns or stopping for photographs. Janet Croft would likely be walking out on her own before we found her, embarrassed but safe. But as I locked my vehicle and stared into the darkening forest, Cody's words echoed. "Something feels off today." The trees seemed to lean inward, watching, waiting. I switched my radio to the search channel and headed into the woods, unaware that nothing in my decade of ranger experience had prepared me for what lurked on the East Rim Trail. By nightfall, I would question everything I believed about the natural world and what might exist beyond it. Paul Croft sat hunched on a bench outside the visitor center, his face buried in his hands. When I approached, he looked up with red-rimmed eyes, mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair and wireframe glasses. He projected the intense anxiety of a man accustomed to order suddenly confronted with chaos. "Mr. Croft, I'm Ranger Braining. We're going to find your wife." He stood, shoulders rigid. "She was supposed to call at 11. Janet is never late. Never." His voice cracked. "We've been married 17 years, and she's pathologically punctual. Something's happened." "When did she start her hike?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. 7:30, right after breakfast. She wanted to see the sunrise over the lake. He showed me a photo on his phone. Janet smiling at the camera, auburn hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing a red fleece jacket and carrying a small backpack with a water bottle in the side pocket. She looked prepared, experienced. "Does she have hiking experience?" "We go every summer. Nothing extreme, but she knows the basics. She has water, trail mix, a map, and her phone, but it's going straight to voicemail now." I nodded, noting details. "Any medical conditions?" "Medications?" "Mild asthma, but she has her inhaler." "Look, she wouldn't just wander off. She's a high school principal, organized, cautious." Marcy approached with coffee for Paul. "Ranger Hayes has covered 2 miles of trail with no sign yet," she informed me. "Forecast has changed. Storm system moving in faster than expected. We might have rain within the hour." "Perfect. A missing hiker and deteriorating weather." I radioed Cody for an update. "Nothing yet." His voice crackled through static. "Found another group of hikers who passed a woman matching her description around 9 this morning, heading east. Said she seemed fine, taking photographs." "Keep going. I'm starting from North Junction. Weather's turning." I turned back to Paul. "Mr. Croft, I need you to stay here with Marcy. If Janet returns or calls, you can reach me immediately on the radio." He nodded reluctantly. "Please find her." The sky darkened further as I entered the East Rim Trail. Typically, this path offers spectacular views of the lake, but today fog rolled across the water, obscuring the famous blue surface. The temperature continued dropping, and I zipped my jacket higher. The forest felt different, tense, like the moment before a predator strikes. Pine needles muffled my footsteps as I moved efficiently, calling Janet's name every 100 yards and listening for a response. Only the rising wind answered, moaning through the canopy. 2 miles in, I discovered the first sign, a granola bar wrapper tucked under a rock. The brand Paul had mentioned Janet carried. Intentionally placed, not carelessly dropped. I photographed it and called Cody. Found a marker. She's leaving breadcrumbs. Smart woman, Cody replied. But why? The trail's clearly marked. That question lingered as I continued. The path narrowed, winding through denser forest where shadows deepened beneath ancient pines. The views of the lake disappeared entirely, replaced by moss-covered volcanic rocks and fallen logs. I checked each side trail and possible deviation, marking my progress on my GPS unit. 4 miles in, the first raindrops fell, fat, cold splats that quickly intensified. I donned my rain gear and pressed forward, increasingly concerned about hypothermia if Janet was injured and exposed to these conditions. The discovery of her red scarf came an hour later, caught on a branch beside the trail. It hadn't been there long. The fabric was only slightly damp despite the steady rain. I bagged it as evidence and radioed the find to Cody and base. I'm about half a mile ahead of you, Cody responded. Trail splits up here. The eastern fork isn't on visitor maps, maintenance access only. Steep terrain. Any sign she went that way? A pause. Nothing definitive, but Wade, there are weird tracks here. Animal? Not like any I recognize. Too big for cougar, not shaped right for bear. I frowned. Stay put. I'll be there in 15. The rain intensified as I quickened my pace, the forest darkening prematurely under storm clouds. The wind carried strange sounds, not just the normal creaking of branches, but something almost vocal, a high keening that raised the hair on my neck. I found Cody kneeling beside the trail junction, his raincoat glistening under his headlamp. The beam illuminated a patch of mud where several distinct impressions formed a line heading down the eastern fork. What do you make of these? He asked, voice hushed. I crouched beside him. The tracks were approximately 14 inches long, with unusual spacing, too wide for a human stride. The shape resembled an elongated human footprint, but with only 4 toe impressions, each ending in what appeared to be a claw mark. The depth suggested significant weight. Could be distorted by the rain, I suggested, though I didn't believe it. Cody shook his head. These are fresh, made after the rain started. He pointed to small pools of water forming in the depressions. Wade, in 10 years of search and rescue, I've never seen tracks like these. Mountain lion dragging something? I offered weakly. You know that's not right. Cody stood, scanning the darkening forest. There's something else. Smell that. I inhaled deeply. Beneath the sense of rain and soil was something pungent, like ammonia mixed with rotting vegetation. It clung to the back of my throat, almost inducing a gag reflex. Could be a fungal bloom, I began. Or something dead, Cody finished. He unholstered his sidearm. I don't like this, not with a missing hiker. I couldn't argue. Every instinct warned that something was very wrong. I radioed base, requesting backup and explaining our decision to follow the eastern maintenance trail based on the unidentified tracks. Proceed with caution, came Marcy's reply. Superintendent is sending Ranger Gallagher and Ranger Wilson your way. ETA 40 minutes. Copy that. We're continuing the search. The eastern trail descended sharply, cutting through a section of forest damaged by an old wildfire. Skeletal trees stood like blackened sentinels, their bare branches clawing at the darkening sky. The rain seemed to amplify the silence, creating a bubble where the only sounds were our breathing and cautious footsteps. The tracks continued, sometimes disappearing on rocky stretches before reappearing in muddy patches. They never wavered or showed signs of hesitation, whatever made them moved with purpose. A mile down this trail, we found Janet's backpack. It lay propped against a fallen log, completely soaked but neatly placed, not dropped in panic. The zipper was open, contents seemingly untouched. Water bottle, energy bars, map, cell phone with a dead battery. Why would she leave her supplies? I wondered aloud, examining the area for signs of struggle and finding none. Maybe she didn't, Cody said quietly, pointing his light at something on the ground nearby. A single hiking boot, turned on its side. 15 feet away, its mate lay partially hidden under ferns. The laces on both were untied, as if they'd been carefully removed rather than torn off in a struggle. This doesn't make sense, I said, fighting rising dread. People don't take off their boots in a rainstorm miles from anywhere. Cody swept his light in a wide arc, illuminating the surrounding forest. The strange tracks continued past the backpack, but now there were new impressions alongside them. Bare human footprints, a woman's size. "She's following it," Cody whispered. "Whatever made those tracks, she's walking with it." "Or it's making her," I countered, checking my weapon. The rain suddenly intensified, becoming a torrential downpour that drummed against the canopy. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the forest in stark white light. In that flash, I thought I saw movement deeper in the trees, something tall and thin slipping behind a trunk. "Did you see?" I began. A scream cut through the storm noise, high, terrified, and distinctly human. It came from ahead, perhaps a quarter-mile away. We broke into a run, slipping on wet leaves and mud, calling Janet's name. The trail ended abruptly at a small clearing ringed by massive pines. Our flashlight beams swept the open space, catching nothing but rain and mist. Then another scream, closer now, off to our right. We pivoted, lights searching desperately. "There!" Cody shouted, pointing toward a narrow gap between two massive boulders. I caught a glimpse of movement, pale limbs disappearing into the darkness beyond the rocks. We rushed forward, squeezing through the gap into a space that shouldn't have existed. It was a cave, or something like it. The entrance was natural, but inside, the walls were too smooth, the floor too level. Our lights revealed a chamber about 30 feet across, with a ceiling lost in darkness above. The air inside was different, dry, static, tasting of that same ammonia-like scent, now overwhelmingly strong. In the center of the chamber, Janet Croft lay motionless on the stone floor. And standing over her was something that destroyed every rational explanation I might have offered for the strange tracks, the lingering scent, the feeling of wrongness that had shadowed us all day. The creature was easily 7 feet tall, with a body so thin it appeared almost two-dimensional when viewed from the side. Its skin was pale gray and seemed to absorb our flashlight beams rather than reflect them. The head was bulbous, with no visible nose or ears, just a lipless slit where a mouth should be and enormous black eyes that dominated its face. Its arms hung nearly to the floor, ending in 4 elongated fingers tipped with curved claws. It wasn't looking at us. Its attention was entirely focused on Janet, one spindly hand extended toward her face in an almost tender gesture. "Federal Park Rangers," Cody shouted, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Step away from her." The creature's head snapped toward us with impossible speed. Those black eyes fixed on mine, and suddenly my mind filled with images, the lake bottom, darkness, something ancient sleeping in the deep, waiting, hungry. I staggered backward, overcome with vertigo and nausea. Cody recovered faster, raising his weapon. "Last warning. Back away now." The creature made a sound then, a high, vibrating tone that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. It straightened to its full height, limbs elongating further as if stretching after long confinement. The standoff lasted only seconds, then everything happened at once. The creature moved, becoming a gray blur as it lunged. Not at us, but deeper into the cave where a dark passage gaped like an open throat. Cody fired twice, the gunshots deafening in the enclosed space. The creature stumbled but didn't fall, disappearing into the passageway with a sound like tearing silk. We rushed to Janet, finding her unconscious but breathing. Her skin was ice cold, her fingertips blue. No visible injuries, but her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, as if trapped in intense REM sleep. "We need to get her out of here," I said, already shrugging off my pack to retrieve the emergency blanket. "Call for immediate medical evacuation." Cody stood guard, weapon trained on the dark passage, while I wrapped Janet and prepared to move her. The radio crackled with static, barely functioning in the strange acoustics of the chamber. "Something hit it," Cody said, examining a dark, viscous fluid on the floor where his bullets had struck. "Not blood. Looks like oil?" "Leave it," I ordered, lifting Janet in a rescue carry. "We need to move, now." As if in response, a low vibration began in the chamber floor, rising through our boots. Dust and small stones trickled from above. The passage where the creature had disappeared emitted a pale, pulsing light. "Go," Cody shouted, backing toward the entrance. "I'll cover you." I maneuvered through the narrow entrance, Janet's limp form making it awkwardly tight. Rain still poured outside, but the forest seemed safer than whatever was awakening in that cave. Cody emerged seconds later, breathing hard. "Run," he said simply. "Don't look back." We fled through the downpour, Janet's weight slowing our pace but fear driving us forward. Behind us, The strange vibration grew, shaking the ground. A high, wailing sound rose above the storm. The same keening we'd heard earlier, but louder, angrier. Halfway up the trail, we met Rangers Gallagher and Wilson rushing down with emergency supplies. Together, we created a makeshift stretcher for Janet and established radio contact with base, coordinating an emergency extraction from the northern trailhead where paramedics waited. Only when Janet was safely in the ambulance did I realize I was shaking uncontrollably, not from cold or exertion, but from a terror more profound than anything I'd ever experienced. Cody looked no better, his normally tan face ashen under the flashing emergency lights. "What the hell was that thing?" Wilson asked, having caught only our fragmented explanation during the evacuation. I exchanged glances with Cody. How could we possibly explain what we'd seen? What would we write in our official reports? "I don't know," I finally answered. "But whatever it was, it's still down there, and I think it's been there a very, very long time." Later that night, as ranger teams secured the area and officials debated next steps, Cody and I sat silently in my truck, the rain drumming on the roof. Neither of us suggested going for that beer we'd planned. There wasn't enough alcohol in Oregon to wash away what we'd witnessed. "The tracks," Cody finally said. "They were coming from the lake." I nodded slowly, remembering the images that had flooded my mind when the creature looked at me. Something ancient, something that sleeps in the deep. Crater Lake is nearly 2,000 feet deep, a perfect, pristine blue circle hiding whatever lies beneath. I'd always found that depth beautiful, mesmerizing. Now it terrified me. The emergency room at Sky Lakes Medical Center in Klamath Falls buzzed with controlled chaos as paramedics wheeled Janet Croft through the automatic doors. Paul ran alongside the gurney, his face contorted with worry. Cody and I followed, still drenched from the storm, our uniforms caked with mud and something darker that wouldn't wash away. Temperature 94.3, pulse 42 and thready, pupils dilated but reactive, the paramedic reported to the waiting trauma team. No physical trauma evident, but patient remains unresponsive to stimuli. Dr. Young, with tired eyes and quick hands, took charge immediately. "Get her to trauma 2, start warming measures, full panels, tox screen, and prep for CT." Paul tried to follow as they wheeled Janet away, but a nurse gently intercepted him. "Sir, please wait here. We'll update you as soon as we know anything." He turned to us instead, desperate for answers. "What happened to her? Was she injured? Did she fall?" Cody and I exchanged glances. How could we possibly explain? "Mr. Croft," I began carefully, "we found Janet in a sheltered area off-trail. She doesn't appear to have any physical injuries, but she was unconscious when we located her. Why would she leave the trail? That doesn't make sense. Janet is careful, methodical." I hesitated. "We're still piecing that together. Did Janet ever mention any interest in the caves around Crater Lake?" Paul's brow furrowed. "Caves? No. She's slightly claustrophobic, actually. Wouldn't even tour the lava tubes at Newberry last summer." He studied our expressions. "There's something you're not telling me." Before I could formulate a response, Superintendent Margaret Chen arrived, her weathered face grave beneath her campaign hat. At 62, Chen had spent 4 decades with the National Park Service and commanded respect with her mere presence. "Ranger Braining, Ranger Hayes, a word?" She motioned us away from Paul, leading us to a quiet corner of the waiting room. "I've read your preliminary reports. They're concerning, to say the least." "Ma'am, I know how it sounds," Cody began. She raised a hand. "I'm not dismissing anything yet. Ground-penetrating radar has identified a substantial cave system extending from where you found Mrs. Croft. We've never mapped it before. It doesn't appear on any geological surveys." "Has anyone gone in to investigate?" I asked. "Not yet. After your description of structural instability, we're bringing in specialists from the USGS. They'll arrive tomorrow." She lowered her voice. "The substance you reported on the cave floor, we've collected samples. It's not like anything our field technicians have seen before." A chill ran through me despite the hospital's warmth. "What about the tracks, the ones we followed?" "Washed away in the storm before the evidence team arrived." Chen's expression remained neutral, but I caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Ranger Hayes, you fired your weapon?" Cody nodded. "Twice. Hit whatever it was we saw. And you're both certain it wasn't a bear or mountain lion? Perhaps distorted by poor visibility and stress?" "With respect, ma'am," I said, "we know the difference. This was something else entirely." Chen sighed, the first crack in her professional demeanor. "I've requested support from state wildlife officials and the FBI's field office in Portland. Until they arrive, I need you both to maintain discretion." No discussions with the public or press. What about Mr. Croft? Cody asked. He deserves some explanation. Tell him we're investigating unusual wildlife activity in a previously unmapped cave system. Nothing more until we know what we're dealing with. She checked her watch. I'm heading back to coordinate the response team. Both of you should get some rest. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. After Chen left, a nurse approached with forms for us to complete. The bureaucracy of emergencies, paperwork while a woman lay unconscious, and something inhuman potentially stalked our park. Hours passed in uncomfortable waiting room chairs. Around midnight, the young doctor emerged, looking puzzled. Mr. Croft, your wife is stable. Her temperature is normalized, and all vital signs are improving. However, she remains in what appears to be a catatonic state. What does that mean? Paul demanded. Will she wake up? I believe she will, but I can't tell you when. Her brain activity is highly unusual, intense but patterned, similar to what we see in deep REM sleep. Physically, there's nothing wrong with her. No injuries, no toxins in her system. The doctor hesitated. This may sound strange, but it's almost as if she's processing something. Can I see her? Paul asked. Of course. She's been moved to the ICU for monitoring. Paul turned to us before following the doctor. Thank you for finding her. But this isn't over. I want the full story when she wakes up. Left alone in the waiting room, Cody finally spoke. That thing was in her mind, just like it tried to get into mine when it looked at me. I nodded slowly. You felt it too? The images? The lake. Something sleeping in the deep. Something old. Cody's hands trembled slightly. What if it's still in her head somehow? The thought chilled me. We need to tell Chen. The USGS team should know what they might be dealing with. They'll think we're crazy. Cody ran a hand through his hair. Hell, maybe we are. Maybe we both hallucinated the whole thing, toxic gas in the cave or something. You know that's not true. I leaned forward. Those tracks were real. That cave was real. And whatever that thing was, I couldn't finish the sentence. We finally left the hospital around 1 a.m., checked into a motel near the park entrance, and tried to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those elongated limbs, that expressionless face, those bottomless black eyes staring into mine. Sometime before dawn, I gave up and sat by the window, watching the rain continue to fall, wondering what ancient thing might be moving through our forests under its cover. Morning brought no clarity, just headaches from sleep deprivation and coffee that tasted like burned plastic. We arrived at park headquarters to find it transformed into an operations center. Teams from various agencies huddled around maps and computer screens, while field equipment was sorted and checked in the parking lot. Chen briefed us in her office, the walls covered with topographical maps and satellite images of the search area. The USGS team entered the cave system an hour ago with Park Service escorts. We've established communication protocols and emergency extraction plans. Any sign of unusual activity? I asked carefully. Nothing yet. They've confirmed the existence of a substantial passage extending northeast under the caldera rim. She pointed to a map where a red line indicated the presumed cave system. If their initial survey is accurate, this could be one of the largest unexplored cave networks in the Pacific Northwest. Northeast, Cody repeated. Toward the lake? Chen nodded. Potentially extending under it, yes. A knock at the door interrupted us. A woman in an FBI windbreaker entered without waiting for a response. Superintendent Chen? I'm Special Agent Diane Nakamura, Portland Field Office. Chen made introductions, and Nakamura wasted no time. I've reviewed your Rangers reports. Normally I'd assume this was an animal attack with details distorted by stress and poor visibility. However, she removed photos from a folder and spread them across Chen's desk. These were taken early this morning near the cave entrance. The images showed more tracks, identical to those we'd followed yesterday, but fresher, more distinct. They formed a circle around the cave entrance, as if something had paced there repeatedly. We've had wildlife experts examine these, Nakamura continued. No match to any known species. The stride length and weight distribution are problematic. Meaning? Chen prompted. Meaning they're not anatomically possible for any cataloged North American predator. Nakamura's expression remained neutral. There's more. The substance recovered from the cave floor? Initial analysis shows organic compounds not consistent with any documented wildlife. It contains proteins with a structure our lab hasn't seen before. The room fell silent as the implications settled over us. So you believe us, Cody finally said. I believe something unusual is happening here. Nakamura chose her words carefully. Whether it's what you described in your reports remains to be seen. For now, we're treating this as a potential discovery of an unclassified species. Her radio crackled. Agent Nakamura, USGS team is requesting immediate communication with the rangers who found the cave. We gathered in the communications room, where a radio operator maintained contact with the cave exploration team. Dr. Marcus Webb, the USGS lead, sounded tense even through the static. We've reached a chamber approximately 800 meters in from the entrance, he reported. The formations here are unusual, not consistent with typical limestone or lava tube structures. How so? Nakamura asked. The walls appear sculpted rather than formed naturally. There are recesses at regular intervals, almost like… He paused. Almost like nesting areas or sleeping chambers, but larger than human scale. My mouth went dry. Cody shifted uncomfortably beside me. Dr. Webb, I leaned toward the microphone. This is Ranger Braining. When you entered this chamber, did you notice any unusual smell, like ammonia or chemical preservative? Yes, actually, quite pronounced. How did you know? I exchanged glances with Cody before continuing. And the temperature? Is it significantly different from the rest of the cave system? 15 degrees warmer, with humidity near 90%. Again, how did you know this? Because where you are now isn't where we found Janet Croft. I said slowly. We never made it this far in. The chamber you're describing sounds like a habitat, Cody finished. Dr. Webb, you need to get your team out, now. We've only just begun mapping. Now, I repeated forcefully. The thing we encountered may have retreated deeper into the system. If you're in its living space… Nakamura took over. Dr. Webb, this is Special Agent Nakamura. Implement emergency extraction protocol immediately. Maintain communication throughout your withdrawal. For several tense minutes, we listened to the sounds of the team packing equipment and beginning their retreat. Their voices grew more urgent when one member reported seeing movement deeper in the chamber. Just a shadow, maybe nothing. And again when another claimed to hear a vibration, like someone humming but deeper, coming through the rock. They were halfway to the entrance when Dr. Webb's voice suddenly cut through a burst of panicked crosstalk. Something's following us, moving parallel through adjacent passages. We can hear it. Chen ordered immediate backup to the cave entrance. Cody and I volunteered instantly, grabbing emergency gear and heading for the vehicles. Nakamura joined us, along with 2 other FBI agents and a Park Service tactical team. The drive to the trailhead passed in tense silence, broken only by updates from the retreating cave team. It's getting closer, Webb reported, his scientific detachment fraying. We can see it moving between stalactites about 30 meters back. Long limbs, gray coloration. It's… Jesus Christ, it's fast. The radio erupted with shouting and the sounds of running. Then silence. We abandoned the vehicles at the trailhead, sprinting down the muddy path toward the cave entrance. The rain had stopped, but the forest dripped and glistened, every surface slick. The air felt heavy, pressurized, like the moments before a thunderstorm. We were still half a mile away when the first members of the USGS team emerged from the forest, running in panicked disorder. Dr. Webb among them, his glasses missing and a gash across his forehead leaking blood down his face. It's coming, he gasped when he saw us, right behind us. The tactical team formed a perimeter while Nakamura questioned Webb. How many are still inside? 2, Martinez and Keller. They were bringing up the rear with the survey equipment. It got between them and the rest of us. Webb's hands shook violently. It moved like nothing I've ever seen. 1 minute it was behind us, the next it was ahead, cutting off their escape route. Cody checked his weapon. We need to go back for them. I nodded, though every instinct screamed against returning to that cave. We know what we're dealing with now, sort of. Nakamura made a quick decision. Tactical team stays here to secure these civilians in the perimeter. Braining, Hayes, you're with me and Agents Collins and Reyes. 5 minutes, we find the missing team members and extract immediately. We moved quickly back up the trail, weapons ready. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet again. No birds, no insects, not even wind. Just the sound of our breathing and careful footsteps on wet ground. The cave entrance looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more obviously wrong. The opening between the boulders was wider now, as if something had forced its way through, enlarging the passage. The smooth inner chamber beyond lay exposed to daylight, its alien geometries more visible. We proceeded cautiously, tactical lights sweeping the darkness ahead. The chamber where we'd found Janet now seemed smaller, the ceiling lower. The passage where the creature had disappeared gaped like an open wound in the far wall. Martinez! Keller! Nakamura called. U.S. federal agents, respond if you can hear us. A faint voice echoed from the passage. Help, we're trapped. It's in here with us. We moved toward the sound, entering the passage single file. The tunnel descended steeply, opening into the larger chamber the USGS team had described. Our lights revealed walls carved with geometric patterns too precise to be natural, interlocking hexagons and spirals that seemed to shift when viewed directly. The two missing scientists huddled behind survey equipment in a corner, their lights trained on the chamber's center where a pool of black liquid reflected our beams. The ammonia smell was overwhelming here, burning my nostrils and making my eyes water. Where is it? Cody whispered. One of the scientists pointed upward with a trembling hand. Our lights followed the gesture to the chamber ceiling 15 feet above. Clinging to the rock like some enormous insect was the creature, or one like it. In the better light, I could see details missed in our first encounter. Its skin wasn't merely gray but mottled with patches of bioluminescent blue, pulsing slowly like heartbeats. The eyes weren't solid black but filled with swirling patterns reminiscent of the carvings on the walls. The mouth was vertical rather than horizontal, lined with something that resembled cilia more than teeth. It wasn't moving, just watching us with those hypnotic eyes. Slowly back toward the exit, Nakamura ordered. Hayes, Braining, help the scientists. Collins, Reyes, cover our retreat. We edged forward, keeping our lights and weapons trained upward. The creature remained motionless until we reached the scientists. Then, with terrible swiftness, it dropped from the ceiling, landing between us and the passage out. Standing upright, it was taller than before, nearly 8 feet. Its limbs seemed to elongate as we watched, fingers extending into foot-long claws. The vertical mouth opened, revealing not a throat, but a pulsing mass of those cilia-like structures, vibrating rapidly. The sound came again, that high, keening vibration that made my teeth ache and vision blur. In my mind flashed images more coherent than before. The lake bottom, a structure of non-Euclidean geometry. Dozens of creatures like this one moving through dark water, hunting, waiting, watching the surface world. Nakamura fired first. 3 controlled shots that struck the creature's torso. The impacts released spurts of that oil-like substance, but seemed to cause no pain. If anything, the gunshots agitated it, intensifying the mental projections until my head threatened to split open with their force. The scientists broke first, bolting for the passage with their equipment abandoned. The creature moved to intercept, its speed impossible to track with human eyes. Cody fired, his bullets tearing through one elongated arm. The limb severed completely, dropping to the floor where it continued to writhe independently. The creature screamed, a sound that transcended hearing to vibrate the bones themselves. It retreated several steps, black fluid pouring from the wound. The mental assault intensified. Images of the lake, of ancient things stirring from slumber, of humanity as temporary visitors to a world that belonged to older entities. Go! Nakamura shouted, continuing to fire as we retreated toward the passage. The creature followed more cautiously now, moving in a strange sideways gait, its remaining arm extended toward us as if reaching for something. We backed into the tunnel, the scientists already ahead of us. Collins stumbled on the uneven floor, momentarily dropping his light. In that instant of darkness, the creature surged forward, claws grazing his tactical vest before Reyes dragged him backward. The retreat became a desperate scramble up the sloping tunnel, the creature always just behind, hurting us rather than attacking outright. When we burst into the entrance chamber, daylight momentarily disoriented it, giving us precious seconds to dash for the actual exit. Outside, the tactical team had established a defensive perimeter. As soon as we emerged, they opened fire on the cave entrance, creating a barrier of suppressive fire. The creature didn't follow. Whether deterred by the gunfire or the daylight, I couldn't say. We didn't wait to find out. The entire team withdrew rapidly to the vehicles, the scientists babbling about what they'd seen, the FBI agents maintaining professional calm despite the horror evident in their eyes. Back at headquarters, debriefings lasted hours. Every agency had questions, theories, protocols. Words like undiscovered species and zoological anomaly were used, scientific terminology masking the fundamental wrongness of what we'd encountered. Through it all, I kept returning to those mental images, the lake bottom, the hidden structures, the suggestion of more creatures waiting in the deep. Not a single specimen but a colony, not a chance encounter but the beginning of something larger. That night, as the park was evacuated and a quarantine zone established around the cave entrance, I sat with Cody in the empty ranger station, both of us too wired to sleep. They think they can contain it, Cody said, staring into his cold coffee. Put up fences, post guards, pretend it's just some new animal species. You don't believe that, do you? After what we saw in our heads? He looked up, eyes haunted. It was showing us something, Wade. Warning us, maybe. Or preparing us. For what? I don't know. He set down his cup with deliberate care. But I keep thinking about Janet Croft. How she followed it willingly. How she's still unconscious, her brain in overdrive processing something. A chill ran through me. Like she's being reprogrammed. Or converted. Cody stood abruptly. We need to get to the hospital, now. The ICU corridor stretched before us, antiseptically bright and silent save for the soft beeping of monitors and the squeak of nurses' shoes on polished floors. Despite flashing our badges, we encountered resistance from the floor supervisor. Mrs. Croft isn't receiving visitors, she insisted, positioning herself between us and the room. Doctor's orders. This is a matter of public safety, Cody argued. We need to assess her condition. The supervisor crossed her arms. Her condition is unchanged, stable but unresponsive. Her husband is with her now. I won't disturb them without medical justification. We were debating our next move when Paul Croft emerged from Janet's room, his face haggard from sleeplessness. Seeing us, he approached with urgent steps. She spoke, he said without preamble. Just now. First word since you found her. What did she say? I asked, tension coiling through my body. Paul's expression wavered between hope and confusion. It didn't make sense, she said. They're waking up now. All of them. He rubbed his bloodshot eyes. Then she went silent again. Cody and I exchanged alarmed glances. Mr. Croft, I said carefully. We need to see her. It's important. He hesitated, then nodded. Maybe you can make sense of it. The doctors are baffled. Janet lay motionless in the hospital bed, cardiac monitors beeping a steady rhythm. Her skin had an unhealthy pallor, and dark circles ringed her closed eyes. Nothing in her appearance suggested consciousness, yet her fingers twitched rhythmically against the sheets. Has she done anything else unusual? Cody asked, studying her with wary attention. She's been moving her hands like that for hours, Paul said. The neurologist says it's consistent with nonverbal communication patterns, like sign language, but it's not any recognized system. I leaned closer, noticing a faint discoloration on Janet's arms, patches of skin with a subtle blue-gray tint, barely visible under the harsh hospital lighting. Were these marks here yesterday? Paul frowned. I don't think so. The nurse mentioned possible bruising from IV attempts. But they weren't bruises. The patterns matched the mottled bioluminescence we'd observed on the creature's skin. Mr. Croft, I said, my mouth suddenly dry. Has anyone taken blood samples from Janet today? This morning. Why? We need those samples secured immediately, Cody interjected. And she needs to be isolated. No unnecessary personnel contact. Paul's confusion turned to alarm. What's happening to my wife? Before we could formulate a response that wouldn't induce panic, Janet's eyes snapped open. Instead of normal human eyes, her irises had expanded to fill the entire visible surface, deep black with swirling patterns of luminescent blue. They've been waiting so long, she said in a voice that was hers but somehow not, the cadence wrong, the inflection alien. Sleeping in the deep while you crawled from the ocean, watching while you built your temporary structures. Paul stumbled backward. Janet? Her head turned with mechanical precision to face him. Janet understands now. Janet sees. Soon you will too. Her gaze shifted to Cody and me. The rangers who interfered. You glimpsed the truth, yet still you resist. Inefficient. I reached for the emergency call button, but Janet's hand shot out with impossible speed, catching my wrist. Her strength was overwhelming. Fingers like steel cables digging into my skin. More are awakening, she continued. Not just in the lake. In all the deep places, the old ones stir. Cody drew his off-duty weapon, pointing it not at Janet but at the ceiling. The gunshot shattered the quiet, triggering alarms and bringing hospital security running. In the chaos, Janet released my wrist and fell back against the pillows, eyes closing as if a switch had been flipped. Everything blurred after that, security restraining Cody, doctors rushing in, Paul's confused shouting. FBI agents arrived within minutes, Nakamura among them, bringing the authority needed to establish a containment protocol around Janet's room. Hours later, in a hastily repurposed conference room, Nakamura debriefed us alongside a CDC specialist and two researchers I didn't recognize. Blood samples confirm anomalous cellular structures in Mrs. Croft's system, the CDC doctor explained, displaying microscope images on a tablet. These appear to be synthetic biological constructs, not quite viral, not quite bacterial. They're integrating with her nervous system, particularly concentrated in the brain. An infection? I asked. More like colonization, one of the researchers corrected, his accent vaguely Scandinavian. These constructs are creating a secondary neural network overlaying her existing one. It's remarkably sophisticated bioengineering, far beyond current human capabilities. Can you remove them? Cody asked. Cure her? Uncomfortable glances passed between the experts. We're not sure these are necessarily pathogenic, the CDC doctor said cautiously. They don't appear to be damaging tissue, just repurposing it. She's being converted into some kind of mouthpiece, I said flatly. You all heard what she said. Nakamura leaned forward. We need to consider the broader implications. If Mrs. Croft was infected through contact with this entity, and if her condition is transmissible, the implications hung heavily in the air. Quarantine, containment, the possibility of something spreading beyond our control. The cave has been sealed with concrete and under 24-hour armed guard, Nakamura continued. But if there are more of these creatures in the lake itself, as both your experiences and Mrs. Croft's statements suggest, Crater Lake, with its 6 trillion gallons of water, suddenly seemed less like a natural wonder and more like an incubation chamber for something ancient and malevolent. We need to drain it, Cody suggested, half serious. Impossible, the European researcher responded. But we can scan it. Ground-penetrating radar, sonar mapping. If there are structures down there. There are, I interrupted. I saw them. We both did, when that thing projected images into our minds. Nakamura studied us with clinical detachment. You two are the only ones who've had direct mental contact with the entity and remained unaffected. We need to understand why. That launched a new round of tests. Brain scans, blood work, psychological evaluations. Researchers probed our memories of the encounter while neurologists monitored our brain activity. Through it all, a growing sense of dread built inside me. This wasn't just scientific curiosity. They were assessing whether we too might be compromised. Days blurred together. Crater Lake National Park remained closed indefinitely, cited as an environmental hazard situation in press releases. Janet Croft was transferred to a secure CDC facility, Paul accompanying her under close observation. Teams of researchers descended on the park, establishing monitoring stations around the lake perimeter. A week after the initial incident, the first sonar images from the lake bottom were displayed in a classified briefing. They showed what looked like a complex of geometric structures nestled in the deepest part of the caldera. Architecture that shouldn't exist nearly 2,000 feet underwater, that shouldn't exist at all with its impossible angles and non-Euclidean geometry. These formations predate human settlement in the region, a geologist explained. Based on sediment distribution, they may be contemporaneous with the caldera formation itself, approximately 7,700 years ago. Or older, added an anthropologist quietly. Native legends speak of beings that lived in the mountain before the eruption, who survived by retreating into the earth. Nakamura directed questions to Cody and me. Does this match what you saw in the mental projections? We both nodded. The images were unmistakable, though the actual structures were more extensive than even our visions had suggested. There's movement down there, a sonar technician noted, pointing to shifting patterns near the largest structure. Multiple signatures, similar in size and shape to the entity described in the cave. How many? Nakamura asked. The technician adjusted his equipment. At least 24 that we can distinguish, possibly more in the interior spaces where our imaging can't penetrate. 24 creatures like the one we'd encountered. Possibly more, all awakening after centuries or millennia of dormancy, all potentially able to do to others what had been done to Janet Croft. The next day, I submitted my resignation from the National Park Service. Cody did the same. We'd been effectively sidelined anyway, relegated to providing statements and samples while other agencies took control of the investigation. Neither of us could face returning to patrol duties, knowing what lurked beneath the placid blue surface of the lake. The official story released to the public cited discovery of a previously unknown toxic algae bloom as the reason for the park's continued closure. Social media buzzed with conspiracy theories closer to the truth, but few took them seriously. A local news team attempting to sneak into the restricted zone captured footage of military personnel and unmarked helicopters before being detained and their equipment confiscated. I relocated to western Montana, using my savings to purchase a small cabin near Flathead National Forest. The isolation suited my new paranoia. I avoided large bodies of water, checking and rechecking well water for any hint of contamination. I kept weapons close at hand and slept poorly, plagued by nightmares where I saw through alien eyes, moving through dark water toward unsuspecting human settlements. Cody went further, disappearing into the wilderness of Alaska. Our communication became infrequent, limited to encrypted emails exchanged through anonymous remailers, a precaution that would have seemed absurd before Crater Lake but now felt necessary. "They're watching me," he wrote 3 months after our resignation. "Not FBI or CDC. Them. I can feel them testing the edges of my mind. Stay vigilant. They remember us." I wanted to dismiss his concerns as PTSD-induced paranoia, but I'd experienced the same sensations, moments when the boundary between my thoughts and something external seemed to thin, allowing alien concepts to seep through. During these episodes, I'd feel an overwhelming urge to return to Crater Lake, to descend into its depths, to join what waited there. Janet Croft died 6 months after her encounter, though died might not be the right word. According to the heavily redacted reports Nakamura shared with us, her biological functions ceased after the non-human neural network completely subsumed her original nervous system. The final transformation included physical changes, skin developing those mottled patches of bioluminescence, fingers elongating, eyes enlarging until they dominated her face. The autopsy revealed organ systems restructured for conditions no human could survive, adaptations for extreme pressure, low oxygen, and darkness. Paul Croft disappeared shortly after Janet's death. His apartment was found empty, his car abandoned at a trailhead near the still-closed park. Search parties found nothing. I suspected I knew where he'd gone, drawn to the lake by the same influence that had taken his wife, perhaps receiving mental communications from whatever remained of her consciousness. A year after the incident, Nakamura contacted me unexpectedly, requesting a meeting at a diner in Missoula. She looked older, her formerly immaculate appearance now showing signs of strain, a loosened tie, shadows under her eyes, a slight tremor in her hands as she sipped her coffee. "The situation has evolved," she said without preamble. 3 more cases like Janet Croft in the past month, all from different locations: Puget Sound, Lake Tahoe, Yellowstone Lake. My stomach clenched. "They're spreading." Or they were already there, dormant until now. She pushed a folder across the table. "These are density maps showing deep water bodies across North America. The red markers indicate unusual sonar returns, similar to the structures in Crater Lake." The map was dotted with dozens of red markers, each representing potential colonies of the entities we'd encountered. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "I'm out." I resigned. "Because you and Hayes are still the only humans who've had direct mental contact with them and maintained your autonomy. We need to understand how you resisted the conversion process." I laughed bitterly. "You think we're immune?" "I feel them in my head every day, scratching at the edges of my thoughts, waiting for a moment of weakness." Nakamura's expression darkened. "Then why haven't you succumbed?" "Stubbornness, maybe. Or fear." I pushed the folder back toward her. "Or maybe they're just taking their time with us. Special projects." "We need you back, Braining. Both of you. There's a research facility in Nevada where—" "No." I stood, throwing cash on the table for my untouched food. "I'm not becoming a lab rat, and I'm not going anywhere near your containment facilities where you're probably keeping more of those things." "This isn't optional," she began, but I was already walking away. That night I packed essential supplies and abandoned my cabin, driving north toward the Canadian border. I left my phone, credit cards, and anything else that might be tracked. For the next 2 years I moved frequently, working odd jobs that paid in cash, staying in places too small to attract attention. I grew a beard, lost weight, became someone else. Occasionally news would filter through. Unexplained closures of recreational lakes, scientific expeditions disappearing, clusters of people exhibiting unusual behavior near certain bodies of water. The patterns were clear to me, if not to the general public. The awakening was continuing, accelerating. I tried contacting Cody repeatedly but received no response until a handwritten letter arrived at one of my temporary addresses. Impossible, since I'd told no one where I was staying. "They're in phase 2 now," Cody had written in jagged, hurried script. "Converting water systems, municipal supplies, wells. They're microscopic at first, pieces of themselves they can distribute. Patient, meet me where the mountains touch the sky. You'll know when." The letter disintegrated in my hands after I'd read it, not tearing or burning, but dissolving into fine gray powder that smelled faintly of that same ammonia scent from the cave. That night I dreamed of Crater Lake, its surface silver under moonlight, perfectly still. In the dream I stood at the edge of the caldera, watching as the water began to move. Not with waves or currents, but with purpose, the entire lake rising like a living thing awakening from ancient slumber. From the depths emerged not dozens but thousands of the creatures, their elongated limbs cutting through water as they ascended toward the surface, toward me. I awoke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. Outside my window, the tap in the bathroom sink had turned on by itself, water flowing in rhythmic pulses that mimicked the patterns Janet Croft's fingers had tapped against her hospital sheets. It was time to move again. Away from water, higher into the mountains. Somewhere I could watch and wait, as they watched and waited for us. Because the old ones were waking, and the deep places remembered. The Montana winter settled over the mountains like a predator. Patient, relentless, deadly to the unprepared. 3 years had passed since Crater Lake, and I'd found temporary refuge in an abandoned fire lookout tower 9,000 feet above sea level in the Bitterroot Range. No running water, no electricity, just solitude and elevation between me and what I feared most. Snow piled against the wooden structure, creaking under its own weight during the day, and contracting with gunshot-like reports in the sub-zero nights. I'd stocked provisions to last until spring. Canned goods, dried meat, melted snow for water. The isolation should have been comforting. Instead, it amplified every sound, every shadow, every half-formed thought that might not have been entirely my own. I kept a journal, partly to maintain sanity, partly to document what I'd learned. The pages filled with observations, theories, and newspaper clippings tracking what most people still couldn't see: the pattern of encroachment, disappearances near lakes and reservoirs, changes in water quality dismissed as climate-related algae blooms, remote sensing stations going silent, isolated communities exhibiting unusual collective behaviors. They were moving with glacial patience, these ancient things, not invading but reclaiming. The earth had been theirs long before humans evolved from simpler forms, and they considered our dominance a temporary aberration, a blink in geological time soon to be corrected. I learned this not from research but from the dreams, increasingly vivid communications that came despite my precautions. Even here, surrounded by snow rather than liquid water, they found pathways into my sleeping mind. "You remain apart," the voice would say, not speaking but impressing concepts directly onto my consciousness. "Observe, then. Witness the restoration." I'd wake from these episodes drenched in sweat despite the cold, my notebook filled with writing I didn't remember, complex geometric diagrams and mathematical equations far beyond my understanding. Twice I'd awakened to find myself standing at the lookout's observation deck, staring at the distant valley where a river wound like a blue-black serpent far below. The isolation gnawed at me. With no human contact for months, I began talking to myself, then to the chairs, then to the entities I knew were listening. Sometimes, in moments of weakness, I contemplated surrender, walking down the mountain to the lake below, letting the water take me, accepting the transformation. It would be easier than this constant vigilance, this bone-deep terror that never abated. What stopped me was the memory of Janet Croft's eyes, human features subsumed by something alien and ancient, and the knowledge that Cody was still out there somewhere, still fighting the same battle. On the coldest night of February, with the temperature plunging to 30 below and wind howling around the lookout tower, I awoke to someone pounding on the door. Impossible. The access road was buried under 10 feet of snow. No vehicle could reach this elevation in winter. I grabbed my rifle, approaching the door cautiously. The pounding continued, rhythmic, deliberate, following the same pattern Janet's fingers had tapped in the hospital. "Who's there?" I called, knowing no human could hear me over the wind. The pounding stopped. Then, muffled by the storm in the thick wooden door, "Wade, it's me." Cody's voice, or something wearing it like a borrowed coat. I hesitated, finger on the trigger. "Prove it." A pause. "The day we met, you had a tuna sandwich. You offered me half, but I said I was allergic to fish. You ate both halves and complained about being hungry 2 hours later." A detail so mundane, so human, it momentarily disarmed me. I unbolted the door, keeping the rifle ready. Cody Hayes staggered in with the wind, nearly collapsing on the wooden floor. He looked like a wild man, beard reaching his chest, hair matted, clothes ragged and layered for extreme cold. Most disturbing were his eyes, bloodshot, darting, never settling in one place for long. "Close it," he gasped. "Lock it. They can't come in unless invited, but they'll try to influence you to open it again." I secured the door, then trained the rifle on him once more. "How did you find me?" "Same way they find us. I can feel them too now." He tapped his temple, "But I've learned to use it, to listen to their communications without letting them in completely. They've been tracking you for months. I followed their signal." "Why would they track me?" "Because you're like me, resistant but not immune. We're fascinating to them, anomalies." He pulled off his gloves, revealing hands chapped raw from cold. Got any coffee? It's a long walk from the valley. I made coffee on the propane stove while keeping him in my peripheral vision. He seemed like Cody. The mannerisms, the wry smile despite our circumstances, the way he blew on the hot liquid before sipping. But I'd seen too much to trust appearances. Tell me what's happening out there, I said, nodding toward the snow-covered world beyond the lookout. Cody's expression darkened. Phase 2 is accelerating. They're not just in the deep lakes anymore, they're in the water systems. Municipal supplies, groundwater, even bottled water in some regions. How? The creatures we saw were enormous. They're adapting, creating microscopic versions of themselves, biological drones that retain a psychic connection to the central entities. These microorganisms can survive standard water treatment processes. They accumulate in the human body, gradually altering neural pathways, making people more susceptible to influence. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. How many are affected? Hard to say. Millions, probably. Most don't show obvious signs, just subtle behavioral changes, increased water consumption, attraction to lakes and rivers, collective decision-making that benefits water conservation but in very specific patterns. He set down his mug. There are fully converted communities now, small towns where everyone has accepted the change. They look normal to visitors, maintain regular human activities, but they're not autonomous anymore. They're extensions, like Janet was. And the government, the containment protocols? Cody laughed without humor. Compromised. Your friend Nakamura figured it out too late. She tried to purge converted officials from the task force, but they were already too embedded. Last I heard she was on the run, like us. Jesus. I ran a hand through my beard. So what's endgame? What do they want? Coexistence, they claim. They were here first, forced into dormancy by changing conditions. Now they're reclaiming their place. He leaned forward. But it's not true coexistence they want. They see us as younger siblings who need guidance, who need to be brought into the family properly. By rewriting our brains. By elevating us, in their view. They believe their consciousness is superior, a collective intelligence that spans thousands of years, preserving knowledge across generations. They think they're saving us from our individualism, our short-sighted destruction of the planet. The familiar pressure built at the edges of my mind. That sensation of something vast and cold trying to seep through the cracks in my consciousness. I noticed Cody wincing slightly, experiencing the same intrusion. They're listening now, he said quietly. They always are, when we discuss them directly. I walked to the window, staring out at the endless white landscape. Why come to me now, after all this time? Because I found something, Cody said, his voice dropping further. In Alaska, a way to disrupt their psychic network, not permanently, but enough to create safe zones where humans can remain fully autonomous. He reached into his pack and removed a small metal container. Inside was a crystalline structure that resembled quartz, but with an unusual blue-green coloration. It's a mineral formation unique to geothermal areas where certain fungal colonies grow in proximity to radioactive deposits. The Inuit have legends about stones that quiet the voices from the deep. I thought it was metaphorical until I found these near a hot spring in the Brooks Range. I stared at the crystal skeptically. And this works? It blocks them? It creates interference in their communication frequency? I've tested it. He set the container on the table between us. Feel it? The pressure in my mind had indeed subsided, not completely, but noticeably. The constant background hum of alien thoughts reduced to a distant whisper. There are larger deposits, Cody continued. Enough to establish protected communities, places where we can gather others who've resisted, plan a more coordinated response. What kind of response? We can't fight them conventionally. No, but we can disrupt their spread, develop technologies based on these crystals that might reverse the neural changes in affected humans. His eyes held a fervor that bordered on mania. We're not the only resistors, Wade. There's a network forming. Scientists, military personnel, regular people who've noticed the changes and fought against the influence. Hope, a sensation so foreign I barely recognized it, flickered briefly. Then caution reasserted itself. How do I know you're really here? That this isn't another dream they're feeding me? Cody reached across the table and gripped my wrist, his touch solid, warm, human. You don't, that's the hell of it. But ask yourself, would they present you with a potential weapon against them? Would they plant the idea of resistance when they've been trying to wear down yours for years? It made sense, yet doubt lingered. I'd learned to question everything, especially hope. If what you're saying is true, we can't stay here, I said finally. They know where we are. We leave at first light. There's a temporary haven in the Clearwater Mountains. a research station established by resistors. From there, we head to the primary deposit site in the Canadian Rockies. That night, neither of us slept. We sat watching the door, windows, each other, uncertain which threats were real and which were phantoms born of paranoia. The crystal sat between us, a talisman against influences we couldn't fully comprehend. Near dawn, Cody suddenly stiffened, head cocked as if listening to distant sounds. "They're coming," he whispered. "Not directly, they've sent converted humans. A team moving up the mountain from the south." I checked my rifle again. "How many?" "6, maybe 8. Former park rangers and wildlife officials. People who can navigate this terrain in winter." His eyes met mine. "We can't kill them, Wade. They're victims, not enemies." "Then what do we do?" "We need a head start. The crystal disrupts their ability to track us precisely." He was already packing, movements efficient despite his exhaustion. "There's a hunting cabin 12 miles north. We can reach it by nightfall if we push hard." The hike through waist-deep snow tested the limits of my endurance. The temperature had risen slightly, bringing freezing fog that reduced visibility to mere yards. Cody moved with surprising strength, breaking trail through the drifts, navigating by some internal compass that seemed unnervingly accurate. "How do you know exactly where to go?" I gasped during a brief rest, lungs burning from the cold air and exertion. "I've spent 3 years mapping their presence and their limitations," he replied. "They're strongest near water sources, weakest at high elevations and certain mineral-rich areas. The path I'm taking threads between their spheres of influence." By mid-afternoon, we'd covered 8 grueling miles. The fog had thickened, wrapping us in a white cocoon that muffled sound and distorted distance. Several times I thought I heard voices calling my name, sometimes my father's voice, sometimes Janet Croft's, once even my own voice echoing back from the mist ahead. "Ignore it," Cody warned. "Standard tactics. They find memories, use them to disorient you. Focus on my footprints, nothing else." The sun was setting, painting the fog in amber and crimson, when Cody suddenly stopped, raising his hand for silence. Ahead, barely visible through the murk, stood a figure, human in shape, motionless in our path. "Wade Braining," called a familiar voice. "Still running, I see." Special Agent Nakamura emerged from the fog, wearing the same dark suit I remembered, incongruously formal in this wilderness setting. Her hair was different, longer, with a streak of white at the temple, but her sharp eyes and authoritative presence remained unchanged. "Don't respond," Cody murmured. "It's not her." "It is me, Ranger Hayes," Nakamura replied, her hearing impossibly acute at this distance. "Though I understand your caution, verification protocols are essential now." She approached slowly, hands visible. "October 17th, 2023, Missoula, Montana. I met you at a diner called Sherry's. You ordered apple pie but didn't eat it. I showed you maps of suspected colony sites across North America. I asked you to join a research facility in Nevada, and you refused." Details correct, but still I hesitated. "If you're really Nakamura, what happened after I left that diner?" A ghost of a smile. "I followed you, had agents track you for 3 weeks before you gave them the slip in Spokane. Standard procedure for high-value assets." Cody remained tense beside me. "What's the current status of Operation Deepwater?" "Compromised beyond salvation," she answered without hesitation. 80% of involved personnel showed signs of conversion by June 2024. I extracted the remaining loyalists and established independent cells operating outside official channels. She gestured toward a barely visible path to our right. "The cabin you're heading for was overrun 2 weeks ago. I've been tracking your approach to redirect you to a secure extraction point 3 miles east. Helicopter waiting, but our window closes at 2100 hours. "Why should we trust you?" I demanded. "You could be leading us into their hands." Nakamura reached into her pocket, slowly telegraphing her movements, and withdrew a crystal formation identical to Cody's, but larger. "Because I found these too, in Idaho, not Alaska. And because I know what Hayes discovered about their physiology, the vulnerability to certain frequencies that disrupt their molecular cohesion." Cody's surprise seemed genuine. "You've weaponized it?" "Prototype stage only. Limited effectiveness, but enough to create safe zones." She checked her watch. "We have 73 minutes to reach the extraction point. Decision time, gentlemen." I looked at Cody, searching for guidance. The fog was thickening around us, strange shapes moving at its edges, perhaps natural formations, perhaps not. "We go with her," Cody decided. "The Resistance needs these crystals, and her resources could multiply their effectiveness." We followed Nakamura through the fog-shrouded forest, moving at a punishing pace. She navigated with military precision, consulting a specialized compass that she explained was calibrated to detect the subtle electromagnetic fields the entities generated. Their influence extends further each month, she explained between labored breaths. Water is their primary vector, but they're adapting to transmit through other media, damp soil, fog, even human perspiration in sufficient concentrations. How many people know what's really happening? I asked. Very few. Most resistance is instinctive, people who feel the wrongness but can't identify its source. Those with full awareness number perhaps a few thousand globally. We maintain minimal communication to avoid detection. The extraction point was a small clearing on a ridge overlooking the valley. As promised, a helicopter waited, rotors still but ready, pilot checking instruments in the cockpit. No markings identify the aircraft. No registration numbers, no organizational insignia. Untraceable, Nakamura explained, seeing my inspection. Former military equipment repurposed through channels that no longer exist on paper. As we approached, the pilot exited the aircraft to help with our gear. Something in his movements triggered a warning in my mind. Too fluid, too precisely balanced. Cody tensed beside me, clearly sensing the same wrongness. Nakamura, he said quietly. Your pilot. She nodded almost imperceptibly. I know. Necessary compromise. He's early-stage conversion, still retains operational autonomy. Can't perceive the crystals or our immunity. She lowered her voice further. They believe he's bringing us to a containment facility. Disinformation strategy. The explanation made a certain tactical sense, yet anxiety churned in my stomach as we loaded our minimal gear into the helicopter. The pilot's eyes tracked our movements with mechanical precision, his greeting professionally courteous but empty of genuine human warmth. Once airborne, the fog fell away beneath us, revealing the vast wilderness extending to the horizon. Nakamura provided headsets that allowed communication over the engine noise while apparently blocking the pilot from our conversation. Where exactly are we going? I asked. Former NORAD installation in the Canadian Rockies, she replied. Decommissioned in the 1990s, officially abandoned. We've repurposed it as our primary research facility. Completely self-contained water purification system isolated from groundwater. Extensive shielding that coincidentally blocks their psychic projections. And what happens when we arrive? Cody pressed. What's your endgame here? Nakamura studied him thoughtfully. Candidly, survival first, countermeasures second. The crystals you discovered provide temporary protection, but we need more permanent solutions. Your resistance to their influence makes you uniquely valuable to understanding how to help others fight conversion. You're not planning to retake the world? I asked, half joking. That implies it's already lost. It isn't. Not completely. She gazed out at the darkening landscape below. They've existed alongside humanity for millennia, dormant but present. Whatever triggered their awakening, climate shifts, seismic activity, some cosmic cycle we don't understand. It's accelerating, but it's not completed. They believe they're reclaiming their world, Cody said. And we believe we're preserving ours. Nakamura's expression hardened. Coexistence might have been possible if they'd approached openly, but they chose infiltration, subjugation through conversion. That makes them invaders, regardless of their historical presence. The helicopter banked northward, crossing into Canadian airspace with no formal clearance or acknowledgement. Below, lights of small towns sparkled occasionally amid the wilderness, each one now a question mark. How many minds there were, still fully their own? How many had been subtly rewired to serve entities they didn't even know existed? I've been running for so long, I said quietly, living in fear, questioning my own thoughts. I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else. You're not alone anymore, Nakamura replied. None of us are. That's how we survive this, by remembering our humanity exists in our connections to each other. They offer a collective consciousness that subsumes individuality. We counter with a community that preserves it. The helicopter began its descent toward a mountainside that appeared solid and uninhabited until landing lights suddenly illuminated a concealed hangar entrance. As we touched down inside what proved to be a vast underground complex, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that autumn day at Crater Lake. A sense of solidity, of boundaries between my mind and the external world clearly defined once more. The facility hummed with activity. Researchers in laboratories, communications specialists monitoring global developments, military personnel maintaining security. All wore small crystal formations in various settings, pendants, wristbands, headgear. Welcome to Bulwark Station, Nakamura said as we exited the helicopter. One of 12 such installations worldwide. The front line in a war most of humanity doesn't know it's fighting. That night, in a sparse but comfortable room deep within the mountain, I slept without dreams for the first time in years. No alien thoughts intruded, no subtle compulsions tugged at my subconscious. The silence in my mind was beautiful, healing. Morning brought medical examinations, debriefings, introductions to key personnel. I learned that Cody's crystal and mine had slightly different properties that, when combined, created more effective barriers against psychic intrusion. Researchers were ecstatic, already designing amplification systems based on the complementary resonance patterns. "We've bought time," the lead scientist explained. "Maybe years, if we can deploy these countermeasures strategically. Enough to develop more permanent solutions." Cody adapted to the facility seamlessly, his wilderness survival skills and knowledge of the entities making him immediately valuable to the resistance. I struggled more with the transition back to human society, even this limited version of it. 3 years of isolation had left me awkward, hypervigilant, prone to startling at normal sounds and movements. "It gets easier," Nakamura assured me after witnessing a minor panic attack when the facility conducted a routine security drill. Most of us went through something similar. The human mind is remarkably resilient when given safe space to recover. Gradually, I found purpose again, first in providing detailed accounts of my experiences, then in helping design early warning systems based on my heightened sensitivity to the entity's presence. My decade as a park ranger proved unexpectedly valuable in planning remote monitoring stations across wilderness areas. Weeks became months. The resistance grew stronger, more organized. We established communication with similar groups in Europe, Asia, Australia, sharing discoveries, coordinating responses to entity activity. Technologies developed that could detect converted individuals, protect water supplies, even reverse early-stage neural alterations. Yet for every advance we made, the entities evolved new approaches. They learned to use electromagnetic transmissions when water vectors were blocked. They developed subtler, slower conversion methods that evaded our detection systems. The struggle continued, neither side gaining decisive advantage. 1 year after arriving at Bulwark Station, I stood with Cody on an observation platform carved into the mountainside, watching the sun set over pristine wilderness. Despite everything, the world looked unchanged. Forests stretching to the horizon, rivers winding through valleys, lakes reflecting the darkening sky. Nature's beauty remained, even as invisible battles for consciousness unfolded within it. "Do you ever wonder if we're wrong?" I asked quietly. "If what they offer might actually be better than what we're fighting to preserve? A unified consciousness, ancient knowledge, elimination of the conflicts that make humans so destructive?" Cody considered this seriously, as he did all philosophical questions. "Sometimes. But then I remember what happened to Janet Croft, not offered a choice, but taken. And I think about what makes us human, our contradictions, our individuality, even our capacity for mess and chaos. That's worth preserving." He pointed to a distant lake, its surface glimmering in the fading light. "They've been here since before us, waiting in the deep places. They'll likely be here after us too. But the time between, that's ours. We earned it through millions of years of evolution, struggling up from the same waters they retreated to." I nodded, understanding the truth in his words. We hadn't chosen this war, but we'd found ourselves uniquely positioned to fight it. 2 ordinary park rangers who'd stumbled upon something extraordinary and somehow retained enough of ourselves to stand against it. "They're still out there," I said, feeling the familiar pressure return faintly at the edges of my consciousness, distant but persistent, like waves gradually eroding a shoreline. "Still watching, still waiting." "Yes," Cody agreed, "and so are we." As darkness fell, I thought of Crater Lake, that perfect blue circle hiding ancient secrets beneath its surface. Someday, perhaps, I would return there, not as a fleeing victim but as a defender of boundaries between worlds that were never meant to fully merge. For now, though, my place was here, with others who understood what lurked in the deep places of the earth, and what it would cost to let those depths rise and claim the light. The sun disappeared behind distant mountains, shadows spreading across the wilderness like dark water rising. Night would come, as it always did, but morning would follow, and we would be waiting. I'd been a park ranger for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything these ancient forests could throw at me. Bears, mountain lions, the occasional lost hiker who wandered too far from the marked trails. Standard fare for someone working the remote wilderness areas that stretch from the Utah Territory down through Four Corners country. My name doesn't matter much in this story, but what happened to me in those dark weeks between autumn and winter will haunt me for the rest of my days. It started with Bennett's radio call on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was stationed at the ranger outpost near 9 Mile Valley, about 40 miles from the nearest town, when his voice crackled through the static-filled transmission. "Something's wrong with the wildlife patterns," Bennett reported from his patrol near Monument Valley. His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Bennett had been ranging these lands longer than anyone, a grizzled veteran who'd transferred here from assignments near Skinwalker Ranch and the Apache Reservation. If something spooked him, it was worth paying attention to. "Define wrong," I radioed back, setting down my morning coffee and reaching for my field notebook. "The elk are moving in circles, perfect circles. Found 3 separate herds doing it yesterday, and Silas confirmed the same behavior near Sedona. And the birds." Bennett paused, and I could hear wind whistling through his radio. "Haven't seen a single bird in 2 days, not one." I scribbled notes, my pen hesitating over the paper. Animal behavior anomalies weren't uncommon. Seasonal migration patterns, weather changes, even seismic activity could affect wildlife. But perfect circles? That was new. "Any signs of disease? Parasites?" I asked. "Negative. The animals look healthy. They just keep walking in those damned circles. Damien and Vincent are checking the northern sectors today. Harrison's team is expanding the survey toward Walker Lake." After signing off with Bennett, I spent the morning reviewing incident reports from neighboring districts. Nathaniel, the ranger covering the territory near Blind Frog Ranch, had filed 3 separate reports of unusual animal behavior in the past week. Kingston and Cole, working the eastern boundaries, reported finding deer that had died in geometric patterns, not from predation or disease, but as if they'd simply laid down to die in perfectly straight lines. The radio crackled again around noon. This time it was Zachary, calling from his station near the Navajo Nation border. "We've got a missing hiker," he announced, his young voice tight with concern. "George Tyler, 34, from Denver. His girlfriend Elena says he went out for a day hike 3 days ago and never came back. She filed the report with local authorities this morning." Missing hikers were serious business, but unfortunately not uncommon. I grabbed my emergency pack and radio coordinates while Zachary continued his report. "Elena's got some interesting details. Says Tyler was specifically interested in Native American folklore, had books about skinwalkers, wendigos, that sort of thing. She tried to discourage him from hiking alone, but he insisted he was researching something important." A cold finger traced down my spine. I'd grown up hearing stories about skinwalkers from the Navajo rangers I'd worked with over the years. Traditional beliefs spoke of malevolent witches who could transform into animals, creatures that walked the boundary between the human and animal worlds. Most of the older rangers, especially those with native heritage, refused to discuss the subject at all. "Did Elena mention which trail he was planning to take?" I asked. "That's the thing. She's not sure. Tyler was being secretive about his exact destination, but she found a map in his hotel room with several areas circled, all of them in the restricted zones near ancient burial grounds." I felt my jaw tighten. The restricted zones existed for good reason, not just to protect archaeological sites, but because the terrain was dangerous and poorly mapped. Every year, we lost at least 1 or 2 hikers who ignored the warning signs and wandered into areas where even experienced rangers moved with caution. "I'm heading out to coordinate search efforts," I told Zachary. "Contact Brandon, Austin, and Justin. Tell them to prepare for extended field operations. And Zachary, tell Elena we'll find him." But even as I said it, something cold settled in my stomach. The animal behavior anomalies, the missing hiker with his books about skinwalkers, the reports from rangers who'd worked near places like Skinwalker Ranch, it all felt connected in ways I couldn't yet articulate. As I loaded my gear into the ranger truck, I noticed something that made me pause. The forest around the outpost was completely silent. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, not even the buzz of insects. The silence was so complete it felt oppressive, like nature itself was holding its breath. I started the engine and headed toward the search coordinates, unaware that I was driving toward something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The truck's radio remained silent as I navigated the winding forest roads, but I could swear I felt eyes watching me from the shadows between the trees. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment everything changed. The moment the ordinary world I'd known for 15 years began to crack, revealing something far older and more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Something that had been waiting in these ancient forests long before the first European settlers arrived, long before the first ranger stations were built, long before men like me thought we could protect people from the darkness that dwells in the wild places. The search for George Tyler would become something much more. It would become my introduction to a nightmare I never could have imagined. The search for George Tyler began at dawn the next day. I assembled a team of 6 rangers. Gavin and Bentley would cover the eastern quadrants, while Amir and Brody took the western approach. Xavier and Tristan were assigned to the central area where Tyler's abandoned camp had been discovered by a local tribal police officer. Elena met us at the base camp, a slight woman in her early 30s with dark circles under her eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She kept clutching a photograph of Tyler, a tall, athletic man with sandy hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested someone who'd never encountered real danger. He was obsessed, Elena told me as we reviewed the search grid. Ever since he read about that ranch in Utah, Skinwalker Ranch, he couldn't stop researching. He had theories about ancient migration patterns, about places where she trailed off, shaking her head. I thought it was just academic curiosity. George has a PhD in anthropology. What kind of theories? I pressed gently. Elena pulled a worn notebook from her purse. He believed certain geographical locations served as what he called threshold points, places where the barrier between our world and something else was thin. He marked dozens of sites. Monument Valley, areas near the Apache Reservation, points throughout Four Corners country. I examined Tyler's notebook, and my blood chilled. The man had done extensive research, mapping not just folklore and tribal stories, but correlating them with unexplained disappearances, animal behavior anomalies, and what he termed reality distortions. His notes referenced conversations with tribal elders, scientific papers on magnetic field variations, and detailed topographical analyses of areas where unusual incidents had been reported. One entry, dated just a week before his disappearance, stood out. The pattern is clear. Every 28 years, activity peaks in this region. The last significant event was 1995. If my calculations are correct, something is building toward a climax in the next few weeks. Elena, I said carefully, when did George start this research? About 6 months ago, after we visited Sedona for a vacation. He interviewed some locals there, elderly Native Americans who told him stories about the old days. He came back changed, driven by something I couldn't understand. As we prepared to move out, Nicholas, our communications specialist, pulled me aside. Boss, we've got a problem. Radio communications are spotty at best in the search area, some kind of interference pattern I've never seen before, and the GPS units are giving inconsistent readings. Equipment malfunction? I wish it were that simple. The interference follows a pattern. It gets worse as you move toward the center of the search grid. Lewis and Barrett tested it yesterday during their preliminary survey. Barrett's GPS actually led him in a circle for 2 hours before he realized what was happening. I felt the familiar cold dread settling deeper in my gut. Professional instinct told me to call off the search, to wait for better equipment or additional personnel. But Tyler had been missing for 4 days already, and every hour decreased his chances of survival. We moved out in pairs, maintaining radio contact when possible and following standard search protocols. I partnered with Maxwell, a steady ranger with 10 years' experience who'd worked everywhere from the territory near Walker Lake to the remote areas around Blind Frog Ranch. The forest felt wrong from the moment we entered the search area. The trees grew in strange configurations, not the random patterns of natural growth, but almost geometric arrangements that made no biological sense. Massive pines stood in perfect lines, their branches interwoven in ways that blocked out most of the sunlight and created an unnatural twilight even in the middle of the day. You noticed the quiet? Maxwell asked after our first hour of searching. I had noticed. The forest was completely silent. No wind through the branches, no animal sounds, not even the creak of settling wood. Our footsteps seemed abnormally loud, echoing off the trees in ways that suggested the sound was traveling much farther than it should. Check your compass, I told Maxwell. He pulled out his orienteering compass and frowned. That can't be right. The needle was spinning slowly, never settling on any particular direction. Mine's doing the same thing. We pressed on, marking our path with bright orange tags and calling Tyler's name every few minutes. The responses echoed strangely, seeming to come back from different directions than they should, sometimes returning as distorted whispers that almost sounded like different words entirely. After 3 hours, we found Tyler's first camp, a professional setup with a high-end tent, portable stove, and enough supplies for a week-long expedition. Everything was perfectly arranged, as if he'd simply stepped away for a few minutes. His sleeping bag was still rolled out, his journal open to a page covered with frantic handwriting. I read the final entry with growing unease. It's here, the thing I've been tracking, the presence that exists at the threshold points. I can feel it watching me, circling closer each night. The animals know. They flee during the day and return at night to walk in patterns around my camp. Perfect circles, always moving clockwise. I need to document this, but I'm not sure I should. Some knowledge isn't meant to be preserved. Tomorrow I go deeper into the territory. If something happens to me, tell Elena I'm sorry. The old stories are true, all of them. Maxwell had been examining the camp perimeter and called me over to the edge of a small clearing. Look at this. Animal tracks surrounded the campsite. Elk, deer, bear, and smaller creatures, but they weren't random trail marks. The tracks formed concentric circles around Tyler's tent, dozens of perfect circles at different distances, as if various species had spent hours walking around and around the camp in an endless, purposeless parade. This is impossible, Maxwell said, his voice tight. Animals don't behave this way. Even if they were diseased or disoriented, they wouldn't maintain perfect formations. I knelt to examine the tracks more closely and noticed something that made my skin crawl. Mixed in with the animal tracks were human footprints, bare feet with unusually long toes, and what appeared to be claw marks instead of regular toenails. The human tracks didn't form circles. Instead, they moved in a straight line from the forest edge directly to Tyler's tent, then back out again in a different direction. Maxwell, did you pack plaster for track casting? Yeah, but... He stopped, looking at the footprints I was studying. Jesus Christ, what the hell made those? Before I could answer, a sound echoed through the forest, a long, ululating howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't quite animal and wasn't quite human, but something caught between the two. Something that spoke of intelligence and malevolence and hunger that went beyond any natural predator. Maxwell's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, and I found myself doing the same. The sound faded, but the silence that followed felt even more oppressive than before. We need to call this in, Maxwell said. I pulled out my radio, but only static answered. The interference Nicholas had mentioned was getting stronger. I could barely make out fragments of transmissions from the other search teams, and what I could hear was troubling. Gavin's voice, distorted by static. Following us. Amir, barely audible. Quackeds everywhere. Not right. Then, clear as if he were standing next to us, Tyler's voice came through the radio. Don't follow me deeper. It's not what you think. It's not what any of us think. Maxwell grabbed the radio. Tyler, George Tyler, respond. What's your location? Only silence answered. We stared at each other, both thinking the same impossible thought. Tyler had been missing for 4 days. His radio had been found in his abandoned camp. There was no way he could be transmitting on our frequency. But as we stood there in that unnatural forest clearing, surrounded by the circular tracks of animals that had no business walking in geometric patterns, I began to understand that we were dealing with something far beyond missing hikers or natural phenomena. Something was playing games with us. Something that could mimic human voices. Something that left tracks like a man but moved like a predator. Something that existed in the spaces between what we knew and what we feared. The real search was just beginning, and I had the terrible feeling that we weren't looking for George Tyler anymore. We were looking for whatever had taken him, and it was looking right back at us. By nightfall, we'd lost contact with 2 of our search teams. Gavin and Bentley had missed their scheduled radio check-in at 1800 hours, and Amir reported finding Brody's equipment scattered across a quarter-mile stretch of forest with no sign of Brody himself. I called for immediate extraction and regrouping, but the radio interference had grown so severe that I couldn't reach base camp. Xavier and Tristan confirmed my position through broken transmissions, but when I tried to coordinate our withdrawal, their voices dissolved into static punctuated by sounds that definitely weren't coming from human throats. Maxwell and I decided to establish a defensive position in Tyler's abandoned camp for the night. We had emergency rations, water purification tablets, and enough gear to survive until morning, when we could attempt to hike out of the interference zone and call for backup. As darkness fell, the forest changed. The oppressive silence of the day gave way to sounds that made both of us grip our weapons and peer nervously into the shadows beyond our small fire. Branches creaked and snapped despite the absence of any wind. Footsteps circled our position, sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes something that seemed to shift between the two mid-stride. This is insane, Maxwell whispered, feeding another log into our fire. 20 years of park service, and I've never seen anything like this. I was studying Tyler's journal by firelight, hoping to find some clue that might explain what we were dealing with. The anthropologist's notes became increasingly frantic toward the end, filled with references to tribal stories about Yinalblushi, Navajo words that Tyler translated as those who walk on all fours. According to his research, these beings were witches who had gained the power to transform into animals by violating the most sacred taboos of their culture. They were said to be driven by an insatiable hunger for power and human suffering, able to mimic voices, steal faces, and move through the world as both predator and supernatural force. Listen to this, I told Maxwell, reading from Tyler's notes. From an interview with Diego, a tribal elder near Monument Valley. The skinwalker chooses its hunting ground carefully, places where the earth is thin, where the old powers still flow close to the surface. It will circle its territory for weeks, learning the scent and behavior of everything within its boundaries. When it finally hunts, nothing escapes. Maxwell stood up abruptly, staring into the darkness beyond our fire. Did you hear that? I listened carefully. At first, there was only the usual forest silence. Then, faintly, I heard what had caught Maxwell's attention. Voices calling our names from different directions. Help me. It was Gavin's voice, coming from the north. I'm hurt. Can't make it back to camp. Over here. Bentley's voice, from the east. Found something. You need to see this. Jesus, Maxwell breathed. They're alive. But something was wrong with the voices. They were too clear, too perfectly projected across the forest. And there was something else, an echo that didn't quite match the original sound, as if each voice was being played back a fraction of a second after it was spoken. Maxwell, don't move. I grabbed his arm as he started toward Gavin's voice. Listen again. This time I heard it clearly. Mixed in with Gavin's calls for help was another sound, a low chuckling, barely audible but unmistakably malicious, and Bentley's voice had developed a slight hiss, as if the speaker's tongue was too long for a human mouth. It's mimicking them, I whispered. Something out there is using their voices. The voices continued calling, growing more desperate and angry when we didn't respond. Then they began to change, becoming less human with each repetition. Gavin's pleas for help developed an animal growl underneath. Bentley's discoveries became threats, his voice dropping into registers no human throat could produce. Around midnight the voices stopped entirely. The forest returned to its unnatural silence, but I could feel something moving just beyond the edge of our firelight. Shapes shifted between the trees, sometimes upright like a person, sometimes low to the ground like a large predator. There, Maxwell pointed to our left. Did you see that? I followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of something that made my rational mind rebel against what my eyes were telling me. It looked like a man at first glance, tall and lean, standing just at the edge of the light. But as I watched, its proportions seemed to shift. The arms were too long, the fingers extending into claws that gleamed in the firelight. Its head turned toward us with a motion that was too fluid, too flexible, as if the neck contained more vertebrae than any human spine. When it smiled, I saw rows of teeth that belonged in a predator's mouth. Don't look directly at it, I whispered to Maxwell, remembering something from Tyler's notes. The old stories say they grow stronger when they're observed, when they know they're feared. But it was too late for such precautions. The thing at the edge of our camp had noticed our attention, and its smile widened impossibly. When it spoke, it used Tyler's voice, not mimicked or distorted, but perfect in every detail. You're in my hunting ground now, it said conversationally. I've been watching you all day, learning your scents, your voices, your fears. The others are still alive, if you're wondering. I keep them alive as long as they remain entertaining. Maxwell raised his sidearm, but I pushed his hand down. Bullets won't stop something like that, I hissed. The creature that wore a human shape laughed. Tyler's laugh, but with something hungry and cruel underneath it. The learned Dr. Tyler thought his knowledge would protect him. He knew all the old stories, understood the traditional protections, iron, fire, blessed objects. He tried them all. It held up something that glinted in the firelight. Tyler's silver cross, the one Elena had mentioned he always wore. None of it worked, the thing continued, its voice shifting between Tyler's academic tones and something far more primitive. Because the old stories only tell part of the truth. We're not bound by your human rules, your human understanding of what's possible. We are the darkness between your certainties, the hunger that exists in the spaces where your logic fails. The creature began to circle our camp, staying just beyond the firelight but close enough that we could see its outline shifting and flowing like smoke, given form. I smell your fear, it said. And now its voice was changing, cycling through different tones and accents. Gavin's voice, sweet and sharp. Bentley's voice, like copper pennies. Maxwell's own voice, like the sweat of prey animals. Maxwell was shaking now, his hand white-knuckled on his weapon. I understood his terror, but I also knew that giving in to panic would mean our deaths. Whatever this thing was, it fed on fear as much as flesh. I reached into my pack and pulled out Tyler's journal, flipping to a page I'd noticed earlier. Listen to me, I told Maxwell quietly. Tyler wrote down some kind of protection ritual. Navajo words, specific actions. I'm going to try it. You don't speak Navajo, Maxwell whispered. No, but Tyler phonetically wrote out the pronunciations, and Elena mentioned he'd been practicing traditional chants. The creature heard us talking and stopped its circling. Oh, please do try the ritual. Dr. Tyler performed it beautifully, right before I wore his face to call out for help. But I was already beginning the chant Tyler had transcribed, stumbling over the unfamiliar syllables but continuing with desperate determination. The words felt strange in my mouth, carrying weight and power that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere sound. As I spoke, something changed in the forest around us. The oppressive silence lifted slightly, and I could hear the faint sound of wind through the branches again. Our fire flared brighter, its light reaching farther into the darkness. The creature snarled, not with Tyler's voice, but with something ancient and alien. For the first time since it had appeared, it seemed genuinely angry rather than merely amused. Clever, it hissed. But words alone won't save you. This is my territory, and you are trespassers in a realm where your kind has no power. The ritual Tyler had transcribed was incomplete, I realized. Whatever protection it offered was temporary at best. But it had given us something equally valuable, hope, and the knowledge that this creature wasn't invincible. As dawn approached, I began planning our escape. We needed to reach higher ground, get clear of the interference zone, and call for backup with equipment designed for dealing with something beyond ordinary search and rescue. But first, we needed to survive until morning, and the thing stalking us through these cursed woods seemed determined to ensure that dawn would bring no salvation. The real nightmare was just beginning. Dawn brought no relief. As pale light filtered through the canopy, the creature that had stalked us through the night simply melted back into the forest, leaving only the echo of Tyler's voice promising, "We'll continue this conversation soon." Maxwell and I broke camp quickly, both of us desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere of Tyler's original site. My radio crackled to life as we climbed toward higher ground. The interference was weakening, and I managed to establish brief contact with base. "Olas here." Nicholas's voice cut through static. "Search teams missing. Need immediate backup." "Nicholas, this is primary search leader," I transmitted. "Do not send additional teams into the search area. Repeat, do not send backup. This is not a standard rescue operation." "Understand. What's your status?" Before I could respond, Tyler's voice came through the radio again, clear as if he were standing next to the transmission equipment. "Everything's fine here, Nicholas. False alarm. All teams accounted for. We'll be returning to base by noon." Maxwell grabbed the radio from my hands. "Nicholas, disregard that transmission. We have a hostile situation." But the radio had gone dead again. The creature was learning, adapting its tactics. It understood our technology well enough to manipulate it, and it had apparently been listening to our communications long enough to know our protocols and personnel. "It's hurting us," I told Maxwell as we climbed a ridge that offered a view of the surrounding forest, keeping us isolated while it picks off the search teams one by one. "Why?" Maxwell asked. "If it wanted us dead, it could have killed us last night." I consulted Tyler's journal as we walked. The answer was there, in the anthropologist's increasingly frantic handwriting. The skinwalker doesn't simply kill, it consumes identity itself. Each victim becomes part of its arsenal, another voice it can use, another face it can wear. The longer it keeps prey alive and terrified, the more completely it can absorb their essence. From the ridge we could see disturbing evidence of the creature's activities throughout the forest below. Animals continued to move in those impossible geometric patterns, deer, elk, and bear walking endless circles through the trees like biological clockwork. But now we could see human figures mixed among them. "Jesus Christ," Maxwell breathed, pointing to a clearing about half a mile away. "Is that Gavin?" Through my binoculars I could make out a human figure walking in the same mindless circular pattern as the animals. It moved with Gavin's characteristic stride, wore his ranger uniform, but something was fundamentally wrong with its posture and movements. "And there," I said, scanning the area. "Bentley, Xavier, Tristan." All of our missing team members were visible in different clearings, each walking their own endless circle, each moving with the mechanical precision of wind-up toys. They were alive but not alive, present but somehow absent. As we watched, one of the figures, I thought it might be a mirror, suddenly stopped its circular walk and looked directly up at our position on the ridge. Even at this distance I could see it smile and wave at us with cheerful normalcy before resuming its endless patrol. "We need to get word out," I said. "Whatever's happening here is beyond anything Park Service protocols are designed to handle. This needs military intervention, or I trailed off, realizing how insane that sounded. Or what? Ghostbusters? Maxwell's attempt at humor fell flat in the morning air. Who's going to believe this? Hell, I'm living it and I don't believe it. Before I could answer, we heard voices calling from the forest below. Elena's voice, clear and desperate. Please help me. I came looking for George and got lost. I'm injured. That's impossible, Maxwell said. Elena's back at base camp. But the voice continued, growing more desperate. I can see you on the ridge. Please come down. My ankle's broken. Then, horribly, George Tyler's voice joined the calls. She's telling the truth. I found her this morning. But there's something hunting us. Something that's been wearing my face. Maxwell started down the slope toward the voices before I could stop him. Maxwell, wait. What if it's really them? He called back. What if Tyler managed to rescue Elena somehow? I knew it wasn't them. Tyler's journal had made it clear that he understood exactly what was stalking him, and a man with his knowledge would never expose Elena to this danger. But Maxwell's rational mind was grasping for rational explanations, unable to fully accept what we'd witnessed. The voices grew more frantic as I chased Maxwell down the ridge. Elena's pleas became sobs of pain and fear, while Tyler's voice took on notes of genuine panic. It's coming back. The thing that's been hunting me. Please hurry. When we reached the tree line, the voices stopped abruptly. Maxwell froze, finally realizing the trap, but it was too late. We were back in the creature's territory, back within its sphere of influence. Welcome home, Tyler's voice said from directly behind us. We spun around to find Dr. George Tyler standing 20 feet away, looking exactly as he had in Elena's photograph, healthy, unharmed, wearing clean hiking clothes and a confident smile. If not for the context, I would have believed this was the real man we'd been searching for. George, Maxwell took a step forward. Thank God you're all right. Where's Elena? Maxwell, don't, I warned. But Tyler was already speaking, his voice perfectly matching my memory of our brief radio contact with the missing hiker's girlfriend. She's safe. I found a cave system about 2 miles north of here. She's resting while her ankle heals. Tyler's smile never wavered. I've been trying to reach you on the radio, but there's some kind of interference in this area. Every word was reasonable, every detail plausible. If I hadn't read Tyler's journal, if I hadn't seen the creature stalking our camp the previous night, I might have been convinced. But Tyler's eyes were wrong. They held intelligence and cunning, but not human intelligence. When he looked at us, it was with the focused intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Show us, I said. Take us to Elena. Of course. Tyler turned and began walking deeper into the forest. It's not far, but I should warn you, there are some dangerous animals in this area. I've seen tracks from something large, possibly a bear or mountain lion. We should stay close together. As we followed him through the trees, Tyler kept up a steady stream of conversation that was pitch perfect for a rescued hiker. Gratitude for the search effort, explanations of how he'd survived, concern for Elena's injury. But underneath his words I could hear something else, a barely suppressed amusement, as if the creature was enjoying this performance immensely. How did you find Elena? Maxwell asked. Our reports indicated she was still at base camp. Tyler's stride hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Oh, she came looking for me when I didn't return. Got lost in these woods. Lucky I found her when I did. She was starting to panic. It was a plausible lie, but it revealed something important. The creature didn't have perfect knowledge of our operations. It was improvising, adapting its deceptions based on what we said and did. Tyler, I said carefully, what did you discover out here? Elena mentioned you were researching folklore about skinwalkers. This time the hesitation was more noticeable. The creature wearing Tyler's face turned back toward us, and for just a moment, its expression was completely alien, ancient, predatory, and utterly inhuman. Just academic curiosity, Tyler said, his voice carrying a slight echo that hadn't been there before. Local legends, traditional stories, nothing that turned out to be factual. But even as it spoke, the thing that pretended to be Tyler was changing. Its movements became more fluid, its proportions subtly incorrect. The clothes it wore began to look less like real fabric and more like a projection, a shape imposed on something that didn't naturally hold human form. Where exactly is this cave? I pressed. Just ahead, Tyler replied, but its voice was starting to slip, becoming deeper, developing harmonics that no human throat could produce. You'll see it soon. Elena's waiting. Maxwell had finally noticed something wrong. His hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, and Tyler noticed the movement immediately. Is there a problem? It asked, and now its smile showed too many teeth. I realized we were about to witness the creature's true nature, and I wasn't sure any of us were prepared for what that might mean. The false Tyler was done playing games. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. What happened next shattered every assumption I'd held about the natural world and my place within it. Tyler's false face began to melt like wax in summer heat, revealing something underneath that my mind struggled to process. The features flowed and shifted, cycling through every member of our search team. Gavin's weathered face, Bentley's young features, Amir's dark eyes, Brody's distinctive beard. But it didn't stop there. As we watched in horror, the creature showed us faces I didn't recognize. Men and women of various ages and ethnicities, each expression frozen in a moment of final terror. How many people had this thing consumed over the years? How many identities had it stolen and worn like masks? "You want to see what I really am?" it asked, its voice cycling through dozens of different tones. Some human, some decidedly not. Very few have seen my true face and lived to remember it. Maxwell managed to draw his weapon, but his hand was shaking so badly he could barely aim. "Stay back, federal agent." The creature laughed with a sound like breaking glass. "Federal agent? In my territory? You're nothing here, little man. You're meat that learned to walk upright and forgot its place in the food chain." The final transformation was the most disturbing yet. Tyler's borrowed flesh fell away entirely, revealing something that existed at the intersection of human and animal, possessing the worst attributes of both. It stood upright like a man but moved with predatory grace that belonged to no earthly creature. Its limbs were too long, joints bending in directions that defied anatomy. Most horrible of all were its eyes, human intelligence burning with an alien hunger that spoke of eons spent perfecting the art of causing fear. "This is what your ancestors knew," it said, beginning to circle us with movements that were hypnotically fluid. "This is what they warned you about in stories you dismissed as primitive superstition. We are the darkness that hunts at the edges of your firelight, the whisper that makes you check the locks twice before sleeping." It paused directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell its breath. Carrion and copper and something else, something that reminded me of ozone after lightning strikes. "Do you know what I've learned in my centuries of hunting your kind?" it asked conversationally. "Humans are remarkably predictable. You create rules and structures to make sense of a universe that operates by no rules you can comprehend. You convince yourselves that knowledge equals power, that understanding equals control." Maxwell's weapon finally steadied enough to aim, but the creature ignored him completely. Dr. Tyler believed his research would protect him. He knew the traditional warnings, understood the historical context, even attempted the old rituals. But he made the same mistake all your kind make. He thought he was the hunter instead of the prey. "What did you do with our people?" I demanded. "The search team members, are they alive?" "Oh, they're very much alive. They're experiencing something far beyond death. They're learning what it means to exist without the comforting illusions of human consciousness. They walk my patterns now, adding their steps to the great design I've been weaving across this landscape for decades." It gestured toward the forest around us, and I began to understand the true scope of what we were facing. The animal tracks we'd found, the geometric patterns, the circular migrations, they weren't random behavioral anomalies. They were parts of something larger, a vast ritual or summoning that used living creatures as components. "Every 28 years the barriers weaken," the creature continued. "Places like this become permeable. What your friend Tyler didn't understand is that I'm not just hunting for food or sport. I'm preparing for something much grander." "Preparing for what?" "The return." Its inhuman features arranged themselves into something resembling a smile. "My kind once walked openly in this world. Before your ancestors learned to make fire and forge iron. We were pushed back, confined to the spaces between your certainties, but we never truly left. And every few decades we remember what this world was like when we ruled it." The implications of what it was telling me were staggering. If this creature was telling the truth, then we weren't dealing with an isolated incident. We were witnessing preparation for something that could affect far more than just our small corner of the wilderness. "The missing hikers over the years," I said, pieces falling into place. "The unexplained disappearances near places like Skinwalker Ranch, the Apache Reservation, Blind Frog Ranch. You've been building toward this for decades." "Centuries," it corrected. "Each cycle requires more preparation as your kind grows more numerous and more sophisticated. But you also grow more disconnected from the natural world, more dependent on technologies that fail in places where the old powers flow strong." As if to demonstrate its point, both our radios began emitting a high-pitched whine that rose and fell like a siren. Our GPS units flickered and died, their screens showing impossible coordinates that placed us simultaneously in Monument Valley, Sedona, Walker Lake and 9 Mile Valley. Your rescue is not coming, the creature said. Your technology cannot reach you here. You exist now in my space, by my rules, and those rules are very simple. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted. Maxwell finally worked up the courage to fire his weapon. The bullet struck the creature's center mass and passed through as if it were shooting smoke. The thing didn't even pause in its conversation. Iron, it noted clinically. Very traditional. Your bullets are steel, actually, but close enough to the old protections that they might work under different circumstances. Unfortunately, you're not in Kansas anymore. That's when I noticed something that gave me a desperate idea. The creature's casual dismissal of traditional protections hadn't been entirely accurate. When Maxwell's bullet passed through its form, the impact point had flickered, not quite solid for a fraction of a second. Tyler's ritual, I said suddenly. The protection chant from his journal. It worked, didn't it? That's why you pulled back last night. The creature's eyes narrowed. Temporarily inconvenienced me, nothing more. But there had been something else in Tyler's notes. Something I'd missed in my earlier reading. I pulled out the journal, flipping pages while the creature watched with obvious amusement. Looking for magic words to save you? It asked. Please, continue. I do so enjoy watching prey cling to false hope. I found the page I was looking for. Not a protection ritual, but something Tyler had labeled as a banishment ceremony. According to his notes, this wasn't traditional Navajo practice, but something he'd reconstructed from multiple tribal sources, combined with elements from other indigenous traditions across the Americas. The theory, Tyler had written, is that skinwalkers exist partially outside normal space-time, anchored to our reality by their connection to specific geographic locations. If that connection could be severed during a period of dimensional weakness, the ritual required 3 elements: words of banishment spoken with absolute conviction, a physical token from the creature's territory that could be destroyed, and most importantly, the willing sacrifice of something the speaker valued more than their own life. I looked at Maxwell, this good man who'd followed me into nightmare without question, and made the hardest decision of my career. Maxwell, when I start the chant, I need you to run. Get back to that ridge, get clear of the interference zone, and radio for help. Tell them to evacuate everyone within 50 miles of this area. I'm not leaving you here with that thing. You have to. This isn't about bravery. It's about stopping something that could affect thousands of people if it completes whatever it's planning. The creature had been watching this exchange with predatory interest. How touching. But you've both misunderstood the situation. Neither of you is leaving this forest. You're going to join my collection, and in 28 years, when the barriers weaken again, you'll help me prepare for the next phase. I began Tyler's reconstructed chant, stumbling over pronunciation but pushing forward with desperate determination. The creature's amusement faded as the alien syllables echoed through the forest. Stop, it commanded, its voice carrying harmonics that made my bones ache. But something was happening. The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed on the forest began to lift. Bird calls returned to the distance. The geometric patterns of animal movement visible through the trees began to break up as creatures fled in natural, chaotic directions. You don't know what you're doing, the creature snarled, its form beginning to flicker like a bad television signal. I reached the final phase of the ritual and pulled out my ranger badge. 20 years of service, the symbol of everything I'd dedicated my life to protecting. The physical token from its territory would be the forest itself, represented by a handful of soil I grabbed from the ground. For everyone who came before, everyone who comes after, and everyone who walks these woods in peace, I shouted, throwing the soil into the creature's fluctuating form while crushing my badge in my other hand. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The creature's scream shattered trees 50 yards away. Its form began to collapse inward, pulling at reality itself like a black hole made of malevolent intention. You have no idea what you've unleashed, it shrieked as it imploded. The barriers are already thin. The cycle cannot be stopped. My kindred will sense what you've done and come to finish what I started. Then it was gone, leaving behind only the echo of its final warning and the sound of the forest, slowly returning to life. Maxwell and I stood in stunned silence, both of us unable to fully process what had just happened. In the distance, I could see human figures stumbling through the trees, our missing search team members, finally free from whatever compulsion had held them. But as we began the long trek back to civilization, the creature's final words haunted me. The cycle cannot be stopped. My kindred will sense what you've done. I'd won this battle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. And somewhere in the vast wilderness that stretched from the Utah Territory down through Four Corners country, Other things, like the creature we'd just banished, were stirring, sensing that their ancient schedule had been disrupted. 28 years was a long time, but it might not be long enough to prepare for what was coming next. I retired from Park Service 3 months after the incident. The official report attributed the search team disappearances to environmental disorientation caused by unusual magnetic field fluctuations, and Tyler's body was never found. Elena returned to her life in Denver, never knowing how close she'd come to becoming part of something far worse than simple tragedy. But I kept Tyler's journal, and I've spent the years since that day researching other incidents, other places where reality seems thin and dangerous things slip through the cracks. The creature was right about one thing. This happens in cycles, and humanity's growing disconnection from the natural world has made us more vulnerable, not less. If you're reading this account, it's because the 28-year cycle is approaching its end, and the signs are building toward something I pray I won't live to see. Watch for the patterns: animals moving in geometric formations, electronics failing in specific geographic areas, voices calling from empty wilderness that sound like people you know and trust. And if you find yourself in a place where the old stories feel more real than rational explanation, remember this: some knowledge comes at a price higher than ignorance, but sometimes paying that price is the only thing standing between civilization and the hunger that waits in the spaces between our certainties. The skinwalkers are real, they are patient, and they are coming home. The pine trees swayed with a nervous energy, whispering secrets to each other as if they knew something I didn't. It was the summer of 2025, deep in the heart of Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming, where the quiet had a way of making a person feel small. I've always been the type to find solace in nature, the kind of guy who thought a weekend in the wilderness would clear his head. My name is Gideon Welker, and at 32 I had traded my cushy desk job for the great outdoors. After a decade of climbing the corporate ladder in Chicago, I'd grown weary of the endless meetings, the office politics, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. The final straw came when I missed my father's funeral due to a crucial presentation that, in hindsight, changed nothing. That night, as I sat in my high-rise apartment overlooking a city that never slept, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I applied for a position as a park ranger in Shoshone National Forest. It was a drastic change, but I craved the simplicity and the connection to nature that I'd lost over the years. 3 months later, I found myself driving a beat-up Jeep down a winding road, surrounded by towering pines and rugged mountains. The crisp, clean air filled my lungs, a stark contrast to the smog-filled city I'd left behind. As I approached the ranger station, a sense of peace washed over me. This was it, a fresh start. The first few weeks flew by in a blur of training sessions, trail maintenance, and getting to know my fellow rangers. I learned the ins and outs of wildlife management, search and rescue protocols, and how to handle the occasional lost hiker. It was challenging work, but fulfilling in a way I'd never experienced before. A month into my new job, I was finally settling into a routine. My days were filled with patrolling trails, educating visitors about fire safety, and occasionally rescuing a raccoon from a trash can. The most exciting thing that had happened was a family of bears wandering too close to a campsite. I chuckled at the memory of the tourists' faces when they saw the cubs tumbling after their mother. Little did I know that my peaceful new life was about to be shattered. As I made my final rounds one evening, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I came across something that made my blood run cold. There, scrawled in the dirt near a popular hiking trail, was a warning: turn back or else. I brushed it off as some prank by bored teenagers, maybe the same ones who had spray-painted obscenities on a boulder last week. The only thing I had to worry about was keeping the bears away from the campsites, or so I thought. Little did I know that this simple message would be the harbinger of something far more sinister. As I made my way back to the visitor center, the shadows lengthened, and an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, what could possibly be out here that was worse than the wildlife we dealt with every day? I pushed open the door to the visitor center, the familiar jingle of the bell a comforting sound in the growing darkness. Lisa, my fellow ranger and the only other person on duty that night, looked up from her computer. "Hey, Gideon," she called out, her voice cheerful. "How was your patrol?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to mention the warning I'd found. Lisa had been here for years. Surely, she'd know if there was anything to be concerned about. Finally, I decided to bring it up. "It was fine, but I found something strange out there," I said, approaching her desk. "Have you ever seen any warnings written in the dirt on the trails?" Lisa's brow furrowed, her cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of concern. Warnings? What kind of warnings? I described what I'd seen, watching as her expression grew more troubled with each word. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a deep sigh escaping her lips. I've heard stories, she said hesitantly, old tales from the locals about strange things in these woods, but I've never seen any evidence myself. Her words sent a chill down my spine. What kind of stories? Lisa shook her head. Just old folklore, probably. But if you're really curious, you might want to check with the locals. They know this area better than anyone. As I left the visitor center that night, Lisa's words echoed in my mind. The peaceful forest that had been my sanctuary now seemed to loom ominously around me. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like an outsider, ignorant of the secrets these ancient trees might be hiding. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The warning in the dirt was the first thread in a tapestry of horror that would soon unfold, testing my sanity and my very will to survive. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination. The warning I'd found and Lisa's cryptic response had left me unsettled, and I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I got to the bottom of it. I decided to do a thorough exploration of the area where I'd found the message. But this time, I'd be prepared. I spent the early hours of the morning planning my route. I spread out a topographical map of the forest on my small kitchen table, tracing possible paths with my finger. The trail where I'd found the warning was part of a longer, more challenging hike that wound its way deep into the heart of the forest. It was a route I hadn't fully explored yet, and the thought of venturing into unknown territory sent a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through me. As I plotted my course, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The warning had been clear, turn back or else. But from what? Bears? Mountain lions? Or was it something else entirely, something the stories Lisa mentioned had hinted at? I shook my head, trying to clear these thoughts. I was a trained park ranger, not some scared tourist. Whatever was out there, I was equipped to handle it. Still, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was in over my head. Pushing these doubts aside, I focused on preparing my gear. I packed my sturdy hiking backpack with essentials, extra water, high-energy snacks, a first aid kit, a flashlight with spare batteries, and an emergency blanket. I also included my ranger radio, though reception could be spotty in some of the more remote areas. As I was checking my supplies, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic at the bottom of the bag. I pulled out the small handgun I'd been issued as part of my ranger equipment. I rarely carried it, preferring to rely on my bear spray and knowledge of wildlife behavior. But today, for some reason, I decided to bring it along. Better safe than sorry, I thought, trying to ignore the way my hand trembled slightly as I secured it in its holster. I dressed in layers, knowing the temperature could drop rapidly as the day progressed. Sturdy hiking boots, thick socks, cargo pants with plenty of pockets, and a moisture-wicking t-shirt under a warm fleece jacket. I topped it off with my ranger hat, more out of habit than necessity. As I was about to leave, I hesitated. Should I tell someone where I was going? The rational part of my mind said yes, it was standard procedure. But another part, the part that was growing increasingly paranoid, warned against it. What if someone tried to stop me? What if there really was something out there that the other rangers knew about but weren't telling me? In the end, I compromised. I left a note on my desk at the ranger station, detailing my planned route and expected return time. It was vague enough not to raise immediate alarm, but specific enough that someone would come looking if I didn't return. With my preparations complete, I set out just as the sun was beginning to peek over the eastern mountains. The morning air was crisp and invigorating, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds chirped their morning songs, and in the distance I heard the rustling of small animals going about their day. As I approached the trailhead, I paused, taking in the scene before me. The forest stretched out as far as the eye could see, a sea of green punctuated by rocky outcroppings and the occasional meadow. It was beautiful, serene, and suddenly very intimidating. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Whatever I found out there, I told myself, I was ready for it. With one last look back at the safety of the ranger station, I stepped onto the trail and into the unknown. Little did I know that this hike would change everything. The forest I thought I knew was about to reveal its darkest secrets, and I was walking right into the heart of a mystery that would push me to my very limits. The first few miles of the hike were uneventful, almost disappointingly so. The trail was well maintained, winding its way through stands of towering pines and across babbling brooks. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Under different circumstances, it would have been a peaceful, even enjoyable trek. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a shroud. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush, sent my heart racing. I found myself constantly scanning the trees, looking for what? I wasn't even sure anymore. As I hiked, I tried to distract myself by focusing on the beauty around me. I paused occasionally to identify different plant species or to watch a chipmunk scurry across the path. It was all part of my training, this heightened awareness of my surroundings. But today, it felt different. Instead of appreciating the intricate web of life around me, I felt like I was cataloging potential threats. About 2 hours into the hike, I reached a small clearing. It was a picturesque spot, with a fallen log perfect for sitting and a clear view of the sky above. I decided to take a short break, dropping my pack and stretching my legs. As I sat on the log sipping water and munching on a granola bar, I heard a sound that made me freeze mid-bite. It was a low, keening wail, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote, nor any other animal I could identify. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the trees before fading away. I jumped to my feet, my hand instinctively going to the gun at my hip. My eyes darted around the clearing, searching for the source of the sound. But there was nothing, just the trees, swaying gently in the breeze, and the distant cry of a hawk. Had I imagined it? The forest was quiet now, almost unnaturally so. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I was letting my imagination run wild, influenced by that stupid warning and Lisa's cryptic comments. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was just the wind, or two branches rubbing together in an unusual way. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the day. I quickly packed up my things, suddenly eager to be moving again. As I shouldered my pack, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by a bush, was a scrap of fabric. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a piece of a hiking jacket, the same type sold in our visitor center gift shop. But this wasn't just a carelessly discarded bit of trash. The fabric was torn and stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. My mind raced. Had there been an accident? Animal attack? Or was it something worse? I fumbled for my radio, intending to call it in, but paused with my finger on the call button. What would I say? That I'd found a scrap of bloody cloth and heard a weird noise? They'd think I was losing it. No, I decided. I needed more information before I called this in. I carefully bagged the fabric scrap, making a mental note of its location. Then, with a deep breath to steady my nerves, I continued down the trail. The peaceful atmosphere from earlier was gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every sound a possible danger. I found myself moving more quickly, eager to reach the area where I'd found the warning and, hopefully, find some answers. As the day wore on and I ventured deeper into the forest, the trail became less defined. The underbrush grew thicker, and the trees pressed in closer, their branches seeming to reach out like gnarled fingers. The light took on a strange, greenish quality, filtered through layers of leaves. I checked my map frequently, making sure I was still on course. But as I looked around, I realized with a sinking feeling that nothing looked familiar anymore. The landmarks I'd noted on my map were nowhere to be seen. Had I taken a wrong turn somewhere? Just as panic began to set in, I spotted something ahead that made my heart leap. There, carved into the trunk of a massive old pine, was a crude arrow pointing off the trail. Next to it were the words, "Turn back," gouged deeply into the bark. I stood there staring at the warning, my mind reeling. This wasn't some hastily scrawled message in the dirt. Someone had taken the time to carve this into the tree, and recently too, judging by the freshness of the exposed wood. As I contemplated my next move, that eerie wail echoed through the forest again, closer this time, much closer. And in that moment I knew with chilling certainty that I was no longer alone in these woods. The hike that had started as a fact-finding mission had turned into something far more dangerous. Whatever secrets this forest held, they were about to be revealed, whether I was ready for them or not. The arrow carved into the tree seemed to mock me, its crude lines a stark warning against proceeding further. But I had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath to steady my nerves, I stepped off the main trail and into the dense underbrush, following the direction of the arrow. The forest changed almost immediately. The well-maintained path gave way to a tangle of roots and fallen branches. The canopy above grew thicker, blocking out most of the sunlight and plunging the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. The air became heavy and damp, filled with the musty scent of decaying vegetation. I picked my way carefully through the undergrowth, every sense on high alert. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of leaves under my boots and my own labored breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, unseen eyes following my every move. After what felt like hours of struggling through the dense forest, I emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood an ancient oak tree, its massive trunk twisted and gnarled with age. But it wasn't the tree that caught my attention, it was what surrounded it. Scattered around the base of the oak were dozens of small cairns, stacks of stones balanced precariously on top of each other. Some were simple, just 2 or 3 rocks. Others were more complex, spiraling upwards in intricate patterns. In the dim light, they cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and move of their own accord. I approached cautiously, my skin crawling with an inexplicable sense of wrongness. This was no natural formation. Someone, or something, had created this bizarre monument. But why, and more importantly, who? As I circled the tree, examining the cairns, something caught my eye. There, half hidden by the roots of the oak, was a small opening. A cave? No, I realized as I crouched down for a closer look. It was the entrance to a tunnel. The tunnel was roughly circular, about 3 feet in diameter. It sloped downward into the earth, disappearing into inky blackness. A cool draft wafted from its depths, carrying with it a sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to get as far away from this place as possible. But a morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. What was down there? Could it hold the answers to the mysteries that had been plaguing me? Before I could talk myself out of it, I unclipped the flashlight from my belt and flicked it on. The beam seemed pitifully weak against the oppressive darkness of the tunnel. With one last look at the forest behind me, I took a deep breath and began to crawl into the opening. The tunnel was tight, the rough earth scraping against my back and shoulders as I inched forward. The air grew colder and damper the further I went, that strange odor intensifying until it was almost overwhelming. I tried to breathe through my mouth, fighting back waves of nen. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning beneath the earth. Just as I was about to turn back, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake, the passage widened. I emerged into a large underground chamber, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I began to make out shapes in the gloom. The chamber was roughly circular, its walls smooth as if carved by water over millennia. But it was what filled the space that made my blood run cold. Scattered throughout the chamber were piles of bones. Some were clearly animal, the unmistakable skulls of deer and elk. But others were disturbingly human-like. Femurs and ribs and skulls, some still with tattered bits of clothing clinging to them. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What was this place? A predator's den? But what kind of predator could do this? As I swept my flashlight around the chamber, something caught my eye. There, on the far wall, were markings, not random scratches, but deliberate, ordered symbols. I approached cautiously, my curiosity overriding my fear. The symbols were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They seemed to shimmer and shift in the beam of my flashlight, as if alive. As I stared at them, trying to make sense of their intricate patterns, I felt a strange buzzing in my head. The chamber began to spin around me, and I stumbled, catching myself against the damp wall. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the chamber, and there, emerging from a dark recess I hadn't noticed before, was something that defied explanation. It stood on all fours, but its limbs were elongated, almost unnaturally so. Its body was covered in matted fur, and its shape reminded me of a wolf, but with a hunched back and a twisted face that could only be described as grotesque. It paused, sniffing the air as if it had caught my scent. Every rational thought fled as panic surged through me. I reached for my radio, but my hand shook so badly that I couldn't get a grip. The creature locked onto my gaze, and, for a moment, time seemed to freeze. I was frozen in place, caught in the web of its stare. Then, without warning, it lunged. The beast's charge snapped me out of my paralysis. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as it sailed past me. My flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam spinning wildly and creating a disorienting strobe effect in the chamber. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. The creature let out another bone-chilling howl, the sound echoing off the chamber walls and seeming to come from all directions at once. I snatched up my flashlight and made a mad dash for the tunnel entrance. As I ran, I could hear the beast behind me, its heavy breathing and the scratch of its claws against the stone floor. The tunnel seemed narrower now, more claustrophobic. I crawled as fast as I could, scraping my knees and elbows raw against the rough earth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst out of the tunnel and into the clearing. The dim forest light seemed blindingly bright after the darkness of the underground chamber. I didn't stop to catch my breath, knowing the creature was right behind me. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and tearing at my clothes. The forest was a blur around me as I ran, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling over rocks and fallen logs. When I finally came to a stop at the bottom, I lay there for a moment, dazed and winded. The sound of snapping branches above me jolted me back to reality. I looked up to see the creature at the top of the embankment, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light in the gathering dusk. It seemed to hesitate, as if deciding whether to follow me down the steep slope. I took advantage of its momentary pause to struggle to my feet. My body ached all over, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my face from a cut on my forehead. But I couldn't stop. Not now. I limped as fast as I could through the forest, no longer caring about stealth or direction. My only thought was escape. Behind me, I could hear the creature's pursuit resume, its howls getting closer with each passing second. Just as I thought my legs would give out, I spotted a flash of orange through the trees. A tent. I changed course, heading towards it with renewed energy. As I burst into the small campsite, I saw a startled couple huddled around a campfire. "Run!" I gasped out. "We need to go. Now!" They must have seen the terror in my eyes, or maybe they heard the creature's howls, because they didn't hesitate. We fled together, leaving their campsite behind. As we ran, I fumbled for my radio, praying it hadn't been damaged in my fall. To my relief, it crackled to life. "This is Ranger Welker," I panted into the device. "Emergency situation near Black Rock Creek campsite. Unknown hostile wildlife. Requesting immediate evacuation and backup." The radio squawked with a response, but another howl from behind us drowned it out. The creature was gaining on us. Just when I thought we couldn't run any further, we broke through the tree line onto a dirt road. A Park Service truck was just rounding the bend, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The truck screeched to a halt as we waved frantically. The driver, another ranger I recognized named Tyler, jumped out, his eyes widening as he took in our battered appearance. "Get in!" he shouted, ushering us towards the vehicle. We piled into the truck, and Tyler gunned the engine. As we sped away, I looked back through the rear window. There, at the edge of the forest, I caught a glimpse of a dark shape watching us leave. Then it melted back into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never existed. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the full impact of what had happened hit me. I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. What was that thing? And more importantly, what were we going to do about it? The drive back to the ranger station was a blur. My body ached, my clothes were torn and bloody, and my mind was still trying to process what I'd seen. Tyler peppered me with questions, but I could barely form coherent answers. The couple we'd rescued huddled together in the back seat, pale and shaken. As we pulled up to the station, I saw a flurry of activity. News of the hostile wildlife had spread quickly, and a team was already assembling. Lisa rushed out to meet us, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Gideon, what happened out there?" she asked, helping me out of the truck. I winced as my feet hit the ground, every muscle in my body protesting the movement. I'm not sure," I stammered. "There was something in the woods. Something I've never seen before." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of debriefings, medical checkups, and frantic phone calls. I recounted my story multiple times, each retelling making it sound more unbelievable to my own ears. The creature, the bone-filled chamber, the strange symbols on the wall, it all seemed like a fever dream now. As a park medic cleaned and bandaged my various cuts and scrapes, I overheard snatches of conversation from the other rangers. Search parties were being organized. The forest was being closed to the public. There was talk of bringing in wildlife experts and even the military. Finally, as dawn was breaking, I found myself alone in the small break room. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing, replaying the events of the night over and over. That's when Lisa found me, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in her hands. "How are you holding up?" she asked, sliding one of the mugs towards me. I took a long sip, grateful for the bitter warmth. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me thinks I must be going crazy. The things I saw, they can't be real, can they?" Lisa's expression was grave. "I don't know, Gideon. But I believe you saw something out there. Something that shouldn't exist. Her words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? She sighed, seeming to debate with herself before continuing. Remember those stories I mentioned? The ones the locals tell? They're not just folklore. There have been incidents over the years, things that can't be explained. But nothing like this, nothing so direct. I felt a surge of anger. Why didn't you tell me this before? I could have been killed out there. I'm sorry, Lisa said, her voice heavy with regret. We don't tell new rangers everything right away. It's policy. We didn't want to scare you off, and honestly, most of us thought the stories were exaggerated. But now… Her words trailed off, but the implication was clear. Whatever was out there in the forest, it was real. And it was dangerous. As if on cue, Tyler burst into the break room, his face pale. You guys need to see this, he said, gesturing for us to follow. He led us to the main office, where a group of rangers were huddled around a computer screen. On it was a grainy image from one of the trail cameras we use to monitor wildlife. My heart nearly stopped as I recognized the twisted form of the creature I'd encountered, its eyes glowing eerily in the camera's flash. This was taken about an hour ago, Tyler explained, near the area where Gideon had his encounter. The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Orders were shouted, equipment was gathered, and within minutes a team was preparing to head out into the forest. As I watched them prepare, a sense of dread settled over me. This was far from over. In fact, I had a sinking feeling that it was just the beginning. The creature was still out there, and now that its existence was confirmed, things were about to get a lot more complicated. I caught my reflection in a window and barely recognized myself. My face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under my eyes. But there was something else there too, a determination I hadn't felt before. I had seen this thing up close, had survived an encounter with it. If anyone was going to get to the bottom of this mystery, it would be me. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, I made a decision. I would join the search team. I would face this thing again, armed with knowledge and backup this time. Because one thing was clear, the peaceful forest I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a dangerous, unknown wilderness. And I was right in the middle of it all. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The entire park had been closed to the public with only authorized personnel allowed in. Search teams combed the forest, armed with tranquilizer guns and capture equipment. Wildlife experts from across the country flew in, eager to be part of what was quickly becoming the zoological discovery of the century. I threw myself into the search efforts, partly out of a sense of duty, but mostly because I couldn't shake the memory of those glowing eyes in the darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted form lunging at me. Sleep became a luxury I could ill afford. On the third day of the search, I found myself deep in the forest with a small team. We were approaching the area where I'd had my encounter, and tension hung heavy in the air. The forest seemed different now, more sinister. Every shadow held the potential for danger, every rustle in the undergrowth a possible threat. Gideon, a voice called softly. I turned to see Dr. Elena Reeves, a cryptozoologist who had been brought in to assist with the search. She motioned me over, her eyes fixed on something on the ground. As I approached, I saw what had caught her attention. There, in the soft earth, was a footprint unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was massive, easily twice the size of a human foot, with long, curved claw marks at the end of each toe. It's fresh, Dr. Reeves whispered, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. Very fresh. I felt a chill run down my spine. How fresh? Before she could answer, a blood-curdling howl echoed through the trees. It was the same sound I'd heard in the underground chamber, a sound that haunted my nightmares, and it was close. Everyone stay alert, I shouted, my hand going to the tranquilizer gun at my hip. The team formed a tight circle, backs to each other, scanning the forest around us. For a moment all was silent. Then, with a crash of breaking branches, the creature burst from the underbrush. It was even more terrifying in the daylight, its matted fur caked with mud and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Its eyes, those glowing, intelligent eyes, locked onto me with what I could have sworn was recognition. Time seemed to slow down. I raised my tranquilizer gun, taking careful aim. The creature tensed, preparing to spring. In that moment I knew that everything, my life, the lives of my team, the very mystery of this creature's existence, hung in the balance. I squeezed the trigger. The dart flew true, striking the creature in its muscular shoulder. It let out a roar of pain and anger, staggering slightly. But it didn't go down. Instead, those terrible eyes narrowed, and with a speed that defied its size, it charged straight at me. Gideon, move! Dr. Reeves screamed, but I was frozen in place, watching in horrified fascination as the beast bore down on me. At the last possible second, I dove to the side. I felt the rush of air as the creature sailed past me, its claws raking the ground where I had been standing. It crashed into a tree, momentarily stunned. The rest of the team opened fire, a barrage of tranquilizer darts peppering the creature's hide. It thrashed and roared, a terrifying display of primal fury. But gradually, its movements began to slow. The tranquilizers were taking effect. With one last, baleful glare in my direction, the creature collapsed. The forest fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of my team members. Is it dead? Someone whispered. Dr. Reeves approached cautiously, a device in her hand to check the creature's vital signs. No, she said after a moment. It's alive, just sedated. A collective sigh of relief went through the group. We had done it. We had captured the creature. As the team began to secure the beast for transport, I stood back, my mind reeling. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To solve the mystery, to confront the thing that had haunted my thoughts. But as I watched them bind the creature's limbs, I felt an unexpected pang of, what? Sympathy? Regret? I shook my head, trying to clear these confusing thoughts. This was a dangerous animal, I reminded myself. It had killed people. It needed to be studied, understood. But as they loaded the sedated creature onto a transport vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. The creature's eyes had been so intelligent, so aware. What if it was more than just an animal? What if, in our quest for answers, we were about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed? As we began the long journey back to the research facility, the creature secured in the back of the truck, I found myself hoping that we were doing the right thing. But deep down, a voice whispered that this was far from over. The true test, I feared, was yet to come. The weeks following the capture of the creature were a blur of activity. The research facility, hastily set up on the outskirts of the national park, buzzed with excitement and tension. Scientists from various fields worked around the clock, studying every aspect of our captive. I found myself in a strange position. As the ranger who had first encountered the creature and played a key role in its capture, I was both celebrated and scrutinized. My days were filled with debriefings, interviews, and assisting the research team. But at night, alone in my temporary quarters, doubts gnawed at me. It was during one of these restless nights that Dr. Reeves sought me out. I found her waiting outside my door, her face grave. "We need to talk, Gideon," she said, her voice low. "Not here. Meet me by the old oak at the edge of the compound in 10 minutes. Curiosity piqued. I followed her instructions. The night was cool and clear, the stars twinkling overhead in stark contrast to the harsh floodlights of the research facility. Dr. Reeves was waiting for me, her silhouette barely visible in the shadows of the massive oak. As I approached, she held up a hand, signaling for silence. Dr. Reeves led me further into the darkness, away from any potential eavesdroppers. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What I'm about to tell you goes against everything we've been told, everything we thought we knew," she said. "But I can't keep it to myself any longer." She pulled out a tablet, its screen glowing faintly in the darkness. On it were images of the strange symbols I had seen in the underground chamber. "We've been trying to decipher these since you first reported them," she explained. "At first we thought they were just random markings, maybe territorial signs. But look at this." She swiped to a new image, this one showing similar symbols found on ancient cave paintings from around the world. My mind reeled as I took in the implications. "These creatures," Dr. Reeves continued, "or others like them, have been around for thousands of years. And they're intelligent, Gideon, far more intelligent than we initially thought." She showed me more evidence, brain scans of the captured creature showing complex neural pathways, video footage of it solving puzzles in its enclosure, even attempts at communication through a series of growls and gestures. "But why are you telling me this in secret?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. Dr. Reeves' expression darkened. "Because there are those who don't want this information getting out. They see the creature as a threat, something to be studied and then disposed of." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. I thought back to the creature's intelligent eyes, the way it had seemed to recognize me in the forest. The idea of it being disposed of made me feel ill. "What can we do?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Dr. Reeves' eyes gleamed with determination. "We need to free it, Gideon, tonight, and you're the only one who can help me do it." The next few hours were a blur of careful planning and heart-pounding tension. Using Dr. Reeves' access codes and my knowledge of the facility's layout, we managed to reach the creature's enclosure undetected. As we entered the dimly lit room, I saw the creature for the first time since its capture. It was curled up in a corner, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I remembered. But as we approached, its head snapped up, those intelligent eyes locking onto mine. There was no aggression in its gaze now, only a wary curiosity. As Dr. Reeves worked to disable the security systems, I found myself moving closer to the creature, drawn by an inexplicable urge to communicate. "We're here to help," I said softly, not sure if it could understand me but feeling compelled to try. "We're going to get you out of here." To my amazement, the creature's posture relaxed slightly. It made a low, rumbling sound that was almost reassuring. With a final beep, the enclosure's force field flickered and died. The creature stood, its massive form unfolding until it towered over us. For a heart-stopping moment I thought it might attack, but instead, it simply waited, watching us expectantly. "Now comes the hard part," Dr. Reeves muttered. "We need to get it out of the facility without being seen." What followed was the most surreal experience of my life. We led the creature through the darkened corridors of the facility, our hearts pounding with every footstep. The creature moved with surprising stealth for its size, as if it understood the need for secrecy. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we reached the perimeter fence. Dr. Reeves quickly disabled the electric current, creating a gap large enough for the creature to squeeze through. As it stood at the edge of the forest, the creature turned back to us. Its eyes met mine, and in that moment, I felt a profound connection. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something more. A sense of kinship, of shared understanding. Then, with a soft growl that sounded almost like, "Thank you," it melted into the shadows of the forest. Dr. Reeves and I stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of what we'd done settling over us. We knew there would be consequences, investigations, maybe even legal repercussions. But as I watched the spot where the creature had disappeared, I knew we had made the right choice. In the days and weeks that followed, the forest seemed to come alive in a way it never had before. Rangers reported increased wildlife activity, and there were whispered stories among the locals of a protective presence in the woods. As for me, I found a new purpose. I dedicated myself to protecting the forest and its secrets, to maintaining the delicate balance between the known and the unknown. And on quiet nights when the moon is full and the wind whispers through the trees, I sometimes catch a glimpse of a familiar shape moving through the shadows. In those moments, I'm reminded that the world is far more mysterious and wonderful than we could ever imagine. And I smile, knowing that some secrets are meant to remain hidden, guardians of a truth too profound for the world to fully comprehend. My name is Silas O'Connell, and this happened back in 1995 when I served as a ranger in White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. I was working the summer shift near the Cancun-Megas Highway, trying to keep hikers safe and mostly succeeding until one hot July afternoon changed everything. I remember it was well past lunchtime. I'd eaten a peanut butter and jelly sandwich hours before, and chased it with black coffee from a thermos my sister gave me last Christmas. The mosquitoes were out in force, and I kept swatting at my neck as I trudged along a narrow trail that wound through thick stands of maple and birch. The air felt heavy, as if a storm might roll in by evening. The forest felt calm enough at first glance. I remember the distant hum of a passing car on the highway, the crunch of my boots on loose gravel, and the faint scent of rotting logs somewhere off to the side. I wore my old brown uniform shirt, the elbows patched with my own sloppy stitching, and my knees ached from the morning's patrol. It all seemed normal right up until I found the first body. He was a young man, maybe in his 20s, lying face down beside a mossy boulder about half a mile off the main trail. His red backpack had been torn open, and gear was scattered all around him. An extra sweater, a canteen, a paperback novel now damp and curled from the morning dew. The scene hit me like a physical blow, and I froze in place for several seconds before my training kicked in. My first thought was an accident, maybe a fall from the nearby rock face, but then I spotted deep lacerations on his legs and the back of his neck. They looked too clean and deliberate for any accident. The cuts had a strange precision to them, unlike anything I'd seen from animal attacks or falls. I didn't recognize his face, but hikers came through all summer from every corner of the country. This poor kid could have been from California or Maine or anywhere in between. I knelt down and tried to feel for a pulse, though I knew it was pointless. His skin had that clammy stillness that leaves no doubt. I stood back up, pressing my hand over my mouth, and felt this strange urge to apologize to the forest itself, as if the quiet woods had been violated by this unnatural death. I radioed in. The reception out there wasn't great, but I got through to my colleague Dana Wilcox, who was stationed closer to the ranger cabin. "Silas?" Her voice crackled through the static. "Everything okay?" "I've got a body here, Dana," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Male, mid-20s. Looks like, I don't know what it looks like." She sounded out of breath when she responded. "I'm on my way. Don't touch anything and be careful." Her voice cracked a bit as she spoke, and I realized I sounded rattled too when I answered. We had no real procedure for this sort of thing. White Mountain wasn't exactly known for mysterious deaths. Animal attacks were rare in that part of New Hampshire, and when they happened they usually followed a predictable pattern. But this felt off. The cuts looked too strange, as if made by something with a sharp edge. But I saw no blade marks, no footprints that made sense. I paced around trying to find any clue, careful not to disturb the scene. I remember the way my boot heel slipped on a rock and nearly sent me sprawling. I remember the soft buzzing of a fly near the man's ear, the first sign of nature reclaiming what was lost. The forest seemed to hold its breath around the body, as if waiting for something. I thought about calling it in again, insisting on some backup, maybe state police. But before I could fumble with the radio, I heard a branch snap behind me. When I turned, I saw a shape about 40 yards away, partly hidden behind a cluster of ferns. At first I thought it might be a moose because of the height, but it was thinner than any moose I'd ever seen, and it was not shaped right. Its legs seemed too long and oddly bent. The head was narrow and dark, and what I could make out of the face didn't resemble any animal I knew. I stood there, heart thumping, hand creeping toward my belt where I carried a small canister of pepper spray, useless against something like this, but it was all I had. I never saw eyes in detail, just a sense of movement, a tilt of the head, and then it backed away into the denser undergrowth, quiet, graceful even. I stepped forward, not sure why. Maybe I wanted a better look, or maybe I wanted to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. But it was gone, just the rustle of leaves settling back into place. Dana arrived about 15 minutes later, breathing hard, her ponytail half undone. When she saw the body, she swore under her breath and took a shaky step backward. "Silas, what the hell happened?" she asked, her eyes wide with shock. I tried to explain, though I kept my voice low. It felt like we were trespassing at a crime scene. "I don't know," I admitted. "I found him like this. Looks like he's been dead maybe half a day." She knelt beside the body, careful not to touch anything. "You think it was a person? Some psycho roaming the woods?" I shrugged. I mentioned the thing I saw. She didn't believe me at first, but my face must have told her I wasn't joking. "What do you mean, not an animal?" she pressed. "Like what then?" "I don't know," I said again, feeling stupid. "It was tall. Walked on two legs, I think, but not right." Dana's eyes narrowed. "You're serious?" I nodded. Dead serious. We spent the rest of the afternoon waiting on the authorities. Dana and I kept close, watching the woods. A few hikers wandered by on the main trail, and we directed them away with some excuse about a medical emergency. We didn't mention the body. No need to start a panic. By early evening, a couple of state troopers and a local detective named Hanley showed up. They took photos, asked questions, and told us not to leave the area. I remember Detective Hanley's mustache twitching when he talked and how he kept glancing at the trees. The way he looked at me suggested he didn't believe a word about the creature. I tried to describe it precisely. Tall, gaunt, dark, no visible fur. Limbs long and thin, moving with quiet purpose. Hanley just nodded. "We'll get the coroner out here. Don't wander off." His tone made it clear he thought I might be imagining things or, worse, hiding something. But I knew what I saw. Something was out there in those woods. Something that didn't belong. And I had a sinking feeling we'd be seeing it again. We sat up at the ranger cabin that night. Dana made coffee on the old propane stove, and I tried to keep the mood light, joked about how I regretted not bringing a cheeseburger from town. She forced a smile, but the atmosphere was grim. Reports crackled over the radio about another missing hiker, a woman named Beatrice Langford who hadn't returned to her campsite. "Think it's connected?" Dana asked, her fingers tapping nervously against her mug. "Maybe," I replied, staring out the window at the darkness beyond. "Probably." At about 10 p.m., the wind picked up. The cabin's windows rattled with each gust, and the old building creaked like it was talking to itself. We heard something outside, maybe twigs snapping or footsteps. But when we shone our flashlights through the window, we saw nothing except swaying shadows of branches. "Just the wind," Dana said, not sounding convinced. "Yeah," I agreed. Neither of us believed it. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about those wounds on the hiker's body, how clean they were. No animal I knew could do that. And that figure in the woods. What was it? My mind kept circling back to that shape, trying to make sense of limbs that bent at strange angles, a head that moved with unnatural precision. The next morning dawned gray and humid. Detective Hanley showed up early, his face grim. "We found another one," he said without preamble. The authorities had found Beatrice's body near a rock formation not far from where I'd found the man. Same type of wounds. Her tent had been ripped open from the outside, her sleeping bag torn to shreds. Her hiking boots sat neatly by the entrance, as if she'd been settling in for the night when whatever it was came for her. By then, the troopers looked tense. Detective Hanley pulled me aside while Dana spoke with a forensic technician. "Is there anything else you can tell me about that thing you saw?" Hanley asked, his voice low. He wasn't dismissive anymore. I told him it was quiet, too quiet for something its size. The way it moved, it was deliberate, like it knew exactly what it was doing. He asked if it might have been a large cat with mange or some injured deer. I shook my head. Nothing fit what I'd seen. Dana joined us, her face pale. "Two dead in 2 days," she said. "This isn't right." "Do you have any cameras set up in these woods?" Hanley asked. "Wildlife monitoring, anything like that?" We did, actually. The Forest Service had installed motion-triggered cameras at certain points to track deer populations. Nothing near where I'd found the bodies, but there were a few along major game trails. "We could check the footage," I suggested. "Might have caught something." Hanley nodded. "Do that. And in the meantime, we're bringing in more officers. I want these woods swept thoroughly." More rangers were called in from neighboring stations. We split into small search teams, each assigned a section of the forest to comb through. I paired with Dana, grateful for her steady presence. We were assigned a section about a mile east of where I'd found the first body. We walked through sections of trail where we'd never seen anything dangerous before. The morning sun filtered through green leaves, and birds chirped as if nothing had changed. But I was jumpy, starting at every sound. At one point Dana whispered, "Look," and pointed at some shallow depressions in the moss. They were like footprints, but elongated. The toes splayed in a bizarre way and sank deeper than what a lightweight animal would leave. I felt the hairs at the back of my neck stand up. "We should head back," I said. Dana nodded. I caught a nervous laugh slipping out of my throat. I said something stupid like, "We should have stayed at the cabin and made pancakes." She didn't laugh this time. Her eyes were fixed on something behind me. As we turned, I caught a glimpse of it again. This time it stood maybe 20 yards away, half concealed by a fallen trunk. The head poked up over the wood, just enough for me to see dark leathery skin and something like scars or ridges along the jawline. No clear eyes, but I sensed it studied us. Dana grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. I fumbled for my radio, but the creature took off, moving with unnatural speed through the brush. We both ran, not caring about noise, back toward the cabin. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted, Dana close behind. Every few seconds I glanced back, expecting to see that thing gaining on us, but the forest remained still. When we reached the clearing around the cabin, we found Hanley and a trooper looking at a map spread out on the hood of a patrol car. "We saw it," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "The same thing as yesterday." Hanley's head snapped up. "Where?" I pointed back the way we came. "About a mile in, near the old logging road." The trooper reached for his sidearm, a nervous gesture that didn't inspire confidence. "What exactly did you see?" Hanley pressed. Dana spoke up, her voice steadier than mine. "It was watching us from behind a fallen tree, tall, maybe 7 feet, thin, with skin like old leather, no fur that I could see. And it moved wrong," I added. "Like its joints bent in ways they shouldn't." Hanley nodded slowly. "All right, we're going to set up a perimeter. No one goes into those woods alone." He turned to the trooper. "Radio for backup. I want those wildlife cameras checked immediately." That afternoon, we organized a larger sweep with the troopers and another ranger named Marcus Thompson, who had just arrived from the northern station. Marcus was a big guy, former military, with a booming laugh that seemed too loud for the tense atmosphere. Marcus joked about bringing a camera so he could sell a blurry photo to the tabloids. It was a bad joke, but it helped ease the tension for a minute. We fanned out, calling each other's names now and then to stay in contact. The plan was simple. Find tracks, find any clue, report back immediately. By mid-afternoon, I heard Marcus shout, then nothing. I shouted back, and Dana echoed my calls. We rushed in his direction, Hanley and a trooper converging from another angle. I spotted his hat first. a green baseball cap with the Forest Service logo, lying in a patch of ferns. Then his jacket crumpled under a cedar. His body lay nearby, covered in wounds that looked too similar to ignore. Blood pooled into the moss, and there was a trail of broken branches leading away. I thought I saw something moving at the edge of my vision, a swift, darting shape, but I dared not follow. Dana pressed a hand over her mouth and closed her eyes. I radioed Hanley, voice shaking, and said something like, "He's dead. We need help." We retreated to the cabin again. Hanley and the troopers arrived, pale and grim, carrying rifles now. Marcus had been a big man, strong and capable. Whatever killed him had done so quickly, efficiently. No one was safe. We argued about what to do. One trooper, a tall guy named Bert, wanted to set traps. Another said we should evacuate visitors immediately. Hanley barked orders to clear the trails and get everyone out of this section of the forest before nightfall. "We can't track that thing if it keeps vanishing into the undergrowth," Hanley said. "Meanwhile, more people might stumble into its path." We spent hours warning campers and hikers to leave, making up stories about dangerous conditions. Some looked puzzled, others annoyed, but they packed up. By dusk, the forest was quiet. Just us rangers, a handful of troopers, and whatever hunted here. And as darkness fell, the tension thickened. I could barely sit still, jumping at every creak of the cabin's old boards. Dana and I stayed in the cabin with one trooper on the porch. Hanley and 2 others went out for a final sweep, against my advice. "We'll be back before midnight," Hanley assured us. "Just want to check those camera traps." I watched them disappear into the trees, flashlight beams bouncing through the darkness, and wondered if I'd see them again. Around midnight, as Dana and I spoke in hushed tones about what we'd seen, we heard gunshots echo through the forest. 3 shots in rapid succession, then silence. The trooper on the porch, a young guy named Reynolds, jumped up and clicked his flashlight on, sweeping the beam across the clearing. "That came from the east," Dana said, her face pale in the dim light of the cabin, where Hanley was headed. We waited, straining to hear any follow-up. Minutes passed like hours. No radio chatter, no calls for help. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I tried making a joke about how this was worse than that time I got stuck in a thunderstorm with a leaky tent, but my voice cracked, and Dana just stared at the door. "Should we go look for them?" Reynolds asked, his hand hovering near his holster. I shook my head. "Not in the dark. Whatever's out there can see better than we can." I tried the radio again. "Detective Hanley, do you copy?" Nothing but static answered. We decided to leave at dawn. That was Dana's suggestion, and I didn't argue. We didn't know what happened to Hanley or the others, but we weren't equipped for a rescue. We had no idea how to fight something like that creature, whatever it was. Reynolds disagreed at first, insisted we had a duty to look for Hanley, but Dana eventually convinced him. "If we go out there now, we'll just be 3 more bodies," she said bluntly. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, rifle across my lap, watching the tree line. Dana dozed fitfully on the couch while Reynolds paced, checking his watch every few minutes. The forest outside was unusually quiet. No owls calling, no rustling of nocturnal animals. At one point, around 3 in the morning, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. A shadow, taller than the surrounding underbrush, swaying slightly. I raised the rifle, squinting through the darkness, but whatever it was melted back into the trees. I didn't mention it to the others. At first light, we packed our gear as quietly as we could. Dana checked the radio one last time, sending out a call to Hanley or any of the search teams. Still nothing. I opened the cabin door slowly, checking the porch. Reynolds lay crumpled against the railing, silent. Eyes open but lifeless, throat torn open in that same precise way as the others. He must have stepped outside sometime after I'd seen that shadow. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. "Reynolds is dead," I whispered to Dana. "It was here." She paled but remained steady. "We need to move, now." Dana and I grabbed our packs and crept down the steps, careful not to step in the blood that had pooled under Reynolds' shoulder. The morning air was cool and damp, mist hanging between the trees like ghosts. We picked a route that led straight to the service road where my old truck waited. As we made our way along that path, I thought I saw the figure again at the edge of a clearing, but maybe it was just a stump or a dead tree. I didn't dare approach. We hurried on, the forest strangely still around us. I remember the sweat stinging my eyes as we moved, every sense heightened to painful awareness. Dana whispered, "We'll make it," and I nodded, though my throat felt dry. The path seemed longer than I remembered, each turn revealing only more trees, more shadows. About halfway to the road, we found Hanley's body. He lay face up in a small clearing, his rifle a few feet away, unfired. His throat and chest showed the same precise cuts as the others. Of the 2 troopers who had gone with him, there was no sign. "Jesus," Dana muttered. "Should we?" "Leave him," I said, hating the words even as I spoke them. "We can't help him now." We pushed on, moving faster. I kept glancing back, feeling watched. The sensation of eyes on my back was almost physical, a pressure between my shoulder blades that made me want to break into a run. Then we heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound behind us. Not quite footsteps, more like something being dragged across the forest floor. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep. "Don't run," I whispered. "Not yet." I turned slowly, raising my rifle. The path behind us was empty, but something moved in the undergrowth to the left, a flicker of pale, leathery skin, a suggestion of limbs bending at impossible angles. "When I say go," I murmured to Dana, "run for the truck. Don't stop, don't look back." She nodded, her breath coming in short gasps. I fired a shot into the undergrowth, the sound deafening in the quiet forest. "Go," I shouted, and we ran. The forest blurred around us as we sprinted, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear it behind us, moving through the trees with that strange, fluid grace that seemed so wrong for its size. It wasn't running exactly, more like flowing, each movement precise and economical. We reached the truck by mid-morning, bursting out of the tree line into the gravel lot. I didn't even bother to load my gear neatly. We tossed it in and sped off along the gravel road that led to the highway. I didn't look back, neither did Dana. We left behind dead coworkers, unanswered questions, and something prowling between the trees that we still couldn't name. When we got back to the station in town, we reported what we saw. I'm not sure anyone believed us. They'd find out soon enough as they recovered the bodies. State police took over the investigation, bringing in wildlife experts and more officers. For weeks afterward, that section of the forest was closed to the public. They found the bodies of the missing troopers eventually, both killed in the same manner as the others. Wildlife cameras showed nothing unusual, just normal forest creatures going about their business. Whatever stalked those woods knew how to avoid detection. Theories circulated. Some said it must have been a deranged human killer. Others suggested an unknown animal species, maybe something driven out of its natural habitat. The official report eventually labeled the incidents as animal attacks of undetermined origin. But Dana and I knew better. What we saw wasn't animal or human. It existed somewhere in between, something ancient and patient that had perhaps always been there, watching from the shadows. 3 weeks after our escape from the forest, I found myself sitting across from an FBI agent named Catherine Mercer in a small conference room at the White Mountain Ranger headquarters. Dana sat beside me, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, knuckles white. Agent Mercer was serious and methodical, with short gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to catalog every twitch and hesitation in our responses. She had a stack of files in front of her, and a digital recorder placed squarely between us on the table. "I'd like to go through your statements again," she said, clicking her pen. "Sometimes details emerge on second telling that might have been overlooked initially." I nodded, though I'd already told this story so many times I was sick of hearing it myself. "Where do you want me to start?" "From the beginning," she said. "The first body you found." So I told her everything again. The young hiker with his torn backpack, the strange cuts on his body, the figure I glimpsed watching from the trees. As I spoke, Mercer took notes, occasionally stopping me to clarify a point. "You said the lacerations were clean and deliberate. What exactly do you mean by that?" I tried to find the right words. "They weren't ragged or torn like an animal attack. They were precise, like surgical incisions, almost. And the creature you saw, can you describe its movements again?" I closed my eyes, trying to recall exactly what I'd seen. It moved, fluidly, like water flowing over rocks. But at the same time, its joints seemed to bend at angles that shouldn't be possible. Dana jumped in. It wasn't jerky or awkward. That's what was so unsettling. It moved like it was perfectly adapted to the forest, but in a way that was completely foreign. Mercer nodded, making another note. "We've analyzed the photos from the scene," she said, pulling out several images from a folder. "Our forensics team has some concerns about the nature of the lacerations." She laid out the photos. Clinical, detached images of the victim's wounds. I looked away after a glance, the memories too fresh. "The cuts," Mercer continued, "don't match any known predator pattern. They're too uniform, too precise. And there's something else." She pulled out another photo. This was found embedded in the second victim's shoulder blade. It was a close-up of something thin and curved, about 2 inches long. It looked like a claw, but translucent, almost crystalline in structure. "What is that?" Dana asked, leaning forward. "We don't know," Mercer admitted. "Initial tests suggest it's composed primarily of calcium, but with a molecular structure unlike anything in our database. It's not from any known animal species." A chill ran down my spine. "So you believe us?" Mercer's expression remained neutral. "I believe something unusual happened in those woods. What exactly that was, I'm not prepared to speculate." She gathered the photos and returned them to the folder. "We're keeping this investigation open. In the meantime, that section of the forest remains closed to the public." After the meeting, Dana and I stood in the parking lot, neither of us quite ready to leave. "They know it's not an animal," Dana said quietly. "They just don't want to admit what it might be." I nodded. "Something that shouldn't exist." "I can't sleep," she confessed. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing watching us from the trees. I keep thinking about Marcus, about Reynolds." "I know," I said. "Me too." That night, I drove back to my small apartment on the outskirts of town. The place felt empty and exposed, the windows too large, the shadows too deep. I double-checked the locks before trying to sleep, knowing it wouldn't help if that thing decided to come for me. I dreamed of the forest. In the dream, I was walking the same trail where I'd found the first body, but everything was quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my breathing and footsteps. I came to a clearing and found not a body but a collection of bones arranged in a strange pattern, almost like a nest, and standing over them was the creature, its back to me, shoulders hunched as it worked on something I couldn't see. In the dream, it turned slowly, and I finally saw its face clearly, or rather the absence of a face. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, leathery skin with slight indentations where eyes might be. Below that, a vertical split opened, revealing rows of translucent, crystalline teeth. I woke up gasping, sheets twisted around me, the bedside clock showing 3:17 a.m. Outside, rain pattered against the window, casting wavering shadows across the wall. For a moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin silhouette there, but it was just the branch of a tree, swaying in the wind. The next morning, I called Dana. "I need to go back," I told her without preamble. "Back where?" she asked, though I knew she understood. "To the forest. There's something I need to check." "Silas, that's insane. That thing is still out there." "I know," I said, "but I think I might know what it is, or at least, what it wants." There was a long pause before Dana sighed. "You're not going alone. I'll meet you at the station in an hour." We didn't tell anyone where we were going. The forest was still officially closed, but as rangers we had access. We parked at a service entrance and hiked in, each of us carrying a backpack with supplies, a rifle, and a radio. The forest felt different now, heavier, more watchful. The usual sounds of wildlife seemed muted, as if the animals knew to keep their distance from certain areas. "Where exactly are we going?" Dana asked as we followed a narrow game trail. "The ranger cabin first," I said. "Then I want to check something at the site where I found the first body." "What are we looking for?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure exactly, but in my dream last night I saw bones arranged in a pattern. It reminded me of something I read once about predators that collect parts of their kills." Dana gave me a skeptical look. "You're basing this on a dream?" "Not just that," I said. "Think about it. The precise cuts, the way it seemed to be watching us rather than just attacking. What if it's not just killing randomly? What if it's selecting specific parts?" We reached the ranger cabin by noon. It stood empty and forlorn, yellow police tape still stretched across the porch where Reynolds had died. Inside, everything was as we'd left it. Coffee mugs still on the table, my jacket hanging by the door. I went to the small office in the back, peeling out old logbooks and maps. "There's something else," I said as Dana watched from the doorway. "This isn't the first time strange deaths have happened in these woods." I showed her a logbook from 1978, with entries about 3 hikers found dead over the course of a month. The descriptions were vague, but mentioned unusual lacerations and unexplained circumstances. "And look at this," I said, pointing to a note at the end of the entries. "After the third death, they found strange markings carved into trees near where the bodies were discovered. The ranger who wrote this described them as not human-made, too high up and too deep to be carved by hand." Dana frowned. "So this has happened before. Why isn't there more information? Why isn't this common knowledge?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But look at the timing. 3 deaths in July 1978. And now, 3 deaths in July 1995. What if this thing operates on some kind of cycle?" We spent another hour going through old records before heading to the site of the first body I'd found. The forest grew denser as we approached, the underbrush thicker than I remembered. When we reached the mossy boulder where the hiker had lain, I stopped, scanning the area carefully. "There," Dana said, pointing to a nearby tree. About 9 feet up the trunk there was a series of marks, deep gouges in the bark that formed no pattern I recognized. They looked almost like writing, but in no alphabet I'd ever seen. I took photos while Dana examined the ground nearby. "Silas," she called, her voice tight. "Look at this." In a small hollow at the base of another tree, partially hidden by ferns, was a collection of small bones. They weren't scattered randomly. They'd been arranged in a precise circular pattern, with something dark and organic at the center. "Are those human?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Dana shook her head. "Animal, I think. Probably rabbits or squirrels." She pointed to the dark mass in the center. "But I think that's dried blood." We documented everything carefully, taking photos and notes. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes I'd stop and scan the trees, half expecting to see that tall, gaunt figure standing among them. "We should go," Dana said eventually. "It'll be dark soon." I nodded, though I felt we were missing something important. As we packed up our gear, a twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. We both froze, listening intently. Another snap, closer this time. "Run," I whispered, and we bolted. We crashed through the underbrush, not bothering with stealth. I glanced back once and caught a glimpse of something moving through the trees parallel to us, not directly pursuing, but keeping pace, watching. We reached the truck as the sun began to set, throwing our gear in and speeding away. Only when we hit the paved road did I finally feel like we might make it out alive. "Did you see it?" Dana asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," I said. "It was watching us. But it didn't attack." "Why not?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Maybe it wasn't hungry. Maybe we weren't what it wanted. Or maybe, I thought but didn't say, it was just curious about what we'd found, about whether we understood what it was doing." It's been 30 years since that summer in White Mountain National Forest. I still think about it, especially on hot July nights when the air feels heavy and the shadows seem to move with purpose. I've spent decades researching, trying to make sense of what we encountered. The forest was reopened to the public 2 months after the killing stopped. The official explanation settled on a rogue mountain lion with unusual hunting patterns. Most people accepted this, eager to file away the deaths as an unfortunate but explicable tragedy. Dana and I knew better, but we learned to keep our theories to ourselves. The few times we tried to push for more investigation, we were met with polite dismissal or outright skepticism. Eventually, Dana transferred to a national park in Colorado. We stayed in touch for a few years, Christmas cards and occasional phone calls. But the distance and the weight of our shared secrets strained the friendship. I left the Forest Service the following year. I couldn't bear to walk those trails anymore, always looking over my shoulder, always listening for that distinctive, quiet movement through the undergrowth. I moved to Vermont, took a job teaching environmental science at a community college. I married, had 2 daughters who are now grown with families of their own. A normal life, by all appearances. But I never stopped researching. I collected accounts of similar incidents across the country. Hikers found with precise, unexplained wounds, rangers reporting tall, gaunt figures at the edges of their vision, strange markings carved high in trees where no human could reach. The pattern emerged slowly. Every 17 years, in different forests across the northeastern United States, similar deaths would occur, always in summer, always 3 to 5 victims, always with those same precise lacerations. Never enough to raise national alarm, but too consistent to be coincidence. I've developed a theory, though I've never shared it publicly. I believe what we encountered wasn't an animal in the conventional sense, nor was it human. It was something that has existed alongside us for centuries, perhaps millennia, occasionally intersecting with our world when conditions are right. Those strange bone arrangements we found? I've seen similar structures described in obscure folklore from Appalachian communities, spirit nests they called them, places where something not quite of this world could manifest. The crystalline claw that Agent Mercer showed us? I found references to similar objects in the journals of early settlers, described as ghost shards or witch teeth, supposedly left behind when certain creatures slipped back into whatever realm they came from. I think about that creature sometimes, wonder if it's still out there, waiting for its cycle to begin again. I've marked my calendar for July 2029, 17 years from the last cluster of deaths I've been able to confirm in the Green Mountains of Vermont. Part of me wants to be there, to finally get a clear look at what haunted those woods. The wiser part knows to stay far away. Dana called me last month, the first time we'd spoken in years. Her voice sounded older, more weathered, but I recognized the tension in it immediately. "It's starting again," she said without greeting. 3 hikers found dead in Pisgah National Forest. Same wounds, Silas, same precise cuts. My heart sank. "It's too early. The cycle." "I know," she interrupted. "That's what worries me. Either we were wrong about the pattern or there's more than one of them," I finished. We talked for another hour, sharing what we knew, what we suspected. Dana had kept her own records over the years, tracked her own patterns. Between us, we had documented over 60 deaths across 3 decades that fit the profile. "What do we do?" she asked finally. "No one believed us before. Why would they now?" I didn't have a good answer. We're both in our 60s now, retired, our credibility questionable at best. Who would listen to 2 old rangers telling tales of impossible creatures stalking the forests? But I find myself thinking about those hikers, about Marcus and Reynolds and all the others who died not understanding what had found them. I think about campers and backpackers heading into those woods this summer, unaware of what might be watching from the shadows. So I've decided to write it all down. Everything we saw, everything we've learned since. This account won't convince everyone, but maybe it will reach the right people. Maybe it will make someone more cautious, more observant. Maybe it will save a life. When I got back to the station in town all those years ago, we reported what we saw. I'm not sure anyone believed us. They'd find out soon enough as they recovered the bodies. To this day, I'm not certain what was out there. All I know is that the forest that summer held a secret I never expected. I remember the quiet way it moved, the sudden violence it delivered, and the emptiness it left behind. Sometimes late at night I think about stepping back into those woods, shining a flashlight across the ferns and moss, and trying to see if anything stirs. But I never do. I keep my distance. There's no comfort in answers, not when they confirm your worst fears. The memory alone is enough to keep me away from deep forests and quiet trails. Whatever hunts there has been doing so long before humans came, and will likely continue long after we're gone. If you find yourself in the woods and feel that sensation of being watched, if you hear branches moving with too much purpose, if you glimpse something tall and gaunt at the edge of your vision, don't investigate, don't try to understand, just run, and don't look back. The forest keeps its secrets, and some are better left undisturbed. I always tell people I chose to become a park ranger in Alaska because I loved the wilderness. That's partly true, but there's more to it. There always is. My grandmother named me Dunalley, after the mountain. "Great one," she'd say. "You belong to those ancient places." She was Athabascan, and though my father was not, I carried her stories in my blood. The job offer came during a particularly dark winter in Seattle. My life had collapsed, relationship ended, apartment lost, career stalled. When the posting appeared, experienced wilderness guide sought, remote ranger station, Kenai Peninsula. It felt like the land itself was calling me home. The helicopter dropped me at Black Pine Lake in early April. Spring doesn't truly reach this part of Alaska until May, and a healthy layer of snow still blanketed the surrounding forest. The cabin stood alone on the eastern shore, weathered logs, silvered by decades of harsh winters. Inside was sparse but functional: wood stove, desk, ham radio, supplies. Solar panels and a small generator provided minimal electricity. My nearest colleague was Station 17, 43 miles northeast. My jurisdiction covered nearly 80 square miles of protected wilderness. Radio check-in twice daily. Supervisor Morrison had instructed during orientation. Morning and evening. Missing 2 consecutive check-ins triggers emergency protocol. That first night, I stood on the front porch watching northern lights dance across the sky, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. The silence was absolute. No cars, no people, no city hum, just the occasional crack of lake ice and wind through pines. 3 days later, everything changed. I was marking trails about 2 miles from the cabin when I found the first footprint. Initially, I thought a moose had left the depression in the mud, but no moose walks on 2 legs. The print was massive, nearly twice the size of my boot, with 5 distinct toe impressions. I photographed it with my digital camera, placing my knife beside it for scale. As I crouched there, the forest fell silent. No birds, no insects, just dead air. The hair on my neck prickled. Something was watching me. I scanned the tree line slowly, hand drifting to my sidearm. Nothing moved, yet the sensation of being observed intensified. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the vastness. No response, but a branch snapped somewhere behind me. perhaps quarter-mile distant. Too deliberate to be wind. I hurried back to the cabin, radioing Station 17. Any large wildlife activity reported in Quadrant 6? I asked. Negative, Denali. Standard bear and moose movements only. Why? I almost told him about the footprint. Instead, I said, just being cautious, still getting oriented to the territory. That night, I dreamed of eyes watching from the forest edge. Not animal eyes, but not quite human either. I woke drenched in sweat despite the cabin's chill. The next morning brought the season's first search and rescue. 2 hikers failed to return to their campsite near Eagle Point. I gathered my emergency pack and headed out at dawn. Spring is particularly dangerous. Unstable ice, sudden weather shifts, hypothermia risks. I found them huddled in a makeshift shelter, 12 miles from their departure point. The woman had twisted her ankle. They'd wisely stopped rather than risk further injury. Something followed us, the man whispered as I applied a compression wrap to his companion's ankle. All night, circling our shelter. Probably a black bear, I replied. They're curious, but generally avoid humans. He shook his head. Bears breathe. This thing whistled. Whistled? Like wind through teeth. And it was big. We saw the shadow pass between us and the moon. I helped them back to their vehicle at the trailhead. Standard procedure was to document all wildlife encounters. Under species, I hesitated before writing unknown possible Ursus americanus, but I knew black bears don't whistle. That evening, I found massive scratch marks on the cabin's back wall. 5 parallel lines gouged deep into the wood, nearly 8 feet up. Too high for a bear on all fours, too purposeful for incidental damage. I photographed these too, then reinforced the cabin's door with a chair. I checked my satellite phone, no signal. The radio crackled with static when I tried to reach Station 17. Spring storms often disrupted communications. I'd have to wait until morning. Sleep came reluctantly. Each creak of the cabin's frame jolted me awake. Around 3 a.m., something heavy moved across the porch. The floorboards groaned under substantial weight. I lay frozen in bed, pistol clutched beneath my pillow. Then came the sound, exactly as the hiker described. A whistling, like breath forced through clenched teeth, but deeper, resonating. The door handle turned slowly, testing the lock. I reached for the flashlight, but decided against it. Whatever stood outside, I didn't want to see it. Not yet. The handle jiggled again, more forcefully. Then silence. Minutes stretched interminably before heavy footsteps withdrew. I didn't sleep again that night. Dawn brought no comfort. A dense fog hugged the lake, reducing visibility to mere yards. I stepped carefully onto the porch, scanning for evidence of my night visitor. The wooden planks revealed nothing at first glance, but closer inspection showed subtle indentations, compression patterns from significant weight. At the bottom step, half obscured in mud, was another footprint matching the first. I placed my boot beside it. The print dwarfed mine in both length and width. What disturbed me most were the toes, distinctly human in arrangement but massively disproportionate. I retrieved my camera and paused. Part of me didn't want documentation. Records meant reports, reports meant questions, questions meant scrutiny. I'd sought this position partly to escape scrutiny, to disappear into wilderness. Yet Ranger protocol demanded thorough incident documentation. I photographed everything, then radioed Station 17. "Graham, come in, over." Static answered me. The storm system must have knocked out communications temporarily. I'd try again later. My jurisdiction required daily patrols of key areas. Today's route took me along the Northwest Trail, a rugged path skirting Black Pine Lake before climbing toward Eagle Ridge. The fog thinned as I hiked, but never fully dissipated. Tendrils of mist twisted between trees like searching fingers. 3 miles in, I found the tree. An ancient spruce, at least 6 feet in diameter, had been broken, not cut, not blown down. Broken halfway up its trunk. The splintered wood looked fresh, sap still oozing. No wind event could snap a healthy trunk this size. No standard wildlife possessed the strength. Around the tree's base, the underbrush was flattened in a circular pattern, as if something massive had thrashed about. Pine needles, soil, and vegetation had been raked into small piles. I'd seen bears create ground nests, but never anything this elaborate or purposeful. I crouched to examine the debris piles and noticed something white mixed among the vegetation. Bones. Small, delicate bones. Rabbit, squirrel, marmot. Hundreds of them, meticulously sorted by size. Cold dread pooled in my stomach. This wasn't random animal behavior. This displayed intent, ritualistic arrangement. Intelligence. A branch snapped behind me. Close, perhaps 50 yards through the fog. I pivoted, drawing my sidearm. Park Service, identify yourself. My voice echoed unanswered. Another crack. Closer now. I glimpsed movement, a massive shadow gliding between trees, hunched but bipedal. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Stop right there, I shouted, aiming my weapon toward the movement. The shadow paused. For a moment nothing moved. Then it released that whistling sound, not communication I realized with horror, but mimicry. It was imitating human whistling, a sound it must have heard from hikers or rangers. I fired a warning shot into the air. The report cracked through the forest, momentarily burning away the fog with its muzzle flash. In that instant of clarity I saw it, a towering figure covered in dark fur, impossibly broad shoulders, arms hanging below its knees. Its face remained shadowed, but I caught the reflection of eyes watching me with unmistakable intelligence. Then it was gone, moving with shocking speed for something so large. The fog swallowed its retreat, branches cracking in its wake until silence returned. I half ran, half stumbled back toward the cabin, mind racing. The legends existed across cultures: Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Kushtaka and Tlingit stories. My grandmother spoke of them rarely, and only in whispers, the ones who watch from trees. Just stories, I'd always thought. Just stories to keep children from wandering too far. But I'd seen it now. Undeniably real. Back at the cabin, I tried the radio again. This time, through heavy static, I caught fragments of response. Repeat your situation. Cannot clearly. Weather system. Check in tomorrow. The transmission died completely. I was utterly alone with whatever stalked the forest. That night, I double-checked every window, every door. I positioned emergency flares near my bed and kept my sidearm within reach. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming against the roof. I reviewed my photos, confirming what I'd seen wasn't imagination. The footprints were real. The broken tree was real. I considered my options. Protocol dictated staying at my post unless directly threatened. Abandoning the station without authorization could cost me the job, but what constituted direct threat was being stalked by an unidentified bipedal creature sufficient justification. Around midnight, the rain intensified. Wind howled around the cabin's corners, rattling the windows. Between thunderclaps, I heard it again, that distinctive whistling, not from the porch this time, but circling the cabin's perimeter, testing, probing. I cut the cabin's lights and peered through window slats. Lightning illuminated the yard in strobing flashes. For an instant, I saw it clearly. Massive shoulders hunched against rain, matted fur slick with water, circling my cabin with deliberate, patient strides. It paused at the woodpile, lifted my axe with disturbing ease, and examined it before carefully replacing it. It understood tools. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't merely an animal. Whatever lurked outside possessed reasoning, curiosity, intention. It was studying me as thoroughly as I was studying it. Another lightning flash revealed it standing directly before my window, face inches from the glass. I stifled a scream. Its features were disturbingly human-like. Deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow ridge, a flattened nose, pronounced jaw, but scaled wrong, proportions exaggerated like a cruel caricature of humanity. Our eyes met. Recognition passed between us, predator assessing predator. It pressed one massive hand against the glass, fingers splayed. The window creaked under pressure but held. I raised my gun, hands trembling. It tilted its head, seemingly curious about the weapon. Did it understand firearms? The implications terrified me. We remained locked in this standoff for several heartbeats before it withdrew into darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The storm intensified overnight, evolving into what locals call a widowmaker. Violent, unpredictable weather systems that trap and kill the unprepared. Wind bent trees at impossible angles. Rain turned to sleet, turned to snow as temperatures plummeted. The lake, partially thawed days before, refroze under fresh powder. Nature's mood swings could be lethal in Alaska. Communications remained down. My satellite phone showed no service, towers likely damaged by the storm. The radio produced only static. According to protocol, after missing 2 check-ins, Station 17 would dispatch a wellness check. Under these conditions, that might take days. By morning, I'd made my decision. I couldn't stay. Whatever watched the cabin was growing bolder, more curious. Its strength, evidenced by the broken tree, could easily breach the cabin walls. I needed to reach the emergency shelter at Thunder Point, 15 miles southeast. It had a hardened radio system and steel-reinforced walls. I packed efficiently. Emergency supplies, extra ammunition, first aid, fire starters, GPS unit, enough provisions for 3 days. I left a detailed note at the cabin explaining my departure and documenting the encounters. The journey would be brutal given the weather, but less dangerous than remaining isolated with that thing stalking me. At least, that's what I told myself. I departed at first light, though light proved generous. Dark storm clouds transformed day into perpetual twilight. The temperature hovered around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill pushing it below zero. Snow fell steadily, already 6 inches deep and accumulating. The first 5 miles passed without incident. I followed established trails, moving quickly but carefully. The forest remained eerily silent, wildlife having sought shelter from the storm. Only wind spoke, howling between trunks and rattling bare branches. At mile 6, crossing Blackwater Creek, I noticed the tracks. My blood turned cold despite my exertion. The same massive footprints I'd documented earlier, but fresh, pressed into new snow, paralleling my own path along the opposite creek bank. It was following me. I quickened my pace, pushing through deepening snow. Thunder Point lay 9 miles ahead, perhaps 4 hours under these conditions. The creature's tracks remained consistent, always opposite mine, never crossing the creek but never falling behind either. At mile 8, the creek bent sharply east while my trail continued south. The tracks disappeared with the creek, giving momentary relief. Perhaps it was territorial, unwilling to leave its established range. The reprieve lasted barely an hour. I was navigating a steep ravine when I heard it, that distinctive whistling, carried on the wind. Not alongside me now, but ahead. It had circled in front, anticipating my route. Intelligence and knowledge of the terrain, a deadly combination. I halted, considering options. Continuing forward meant potential confrontation. Retreating meant returning to an unsecured cabin where it knew to find me. Neither choice promised safety. The ravine narrowed ahead between rocky outcroppings, a natural bottleneck. Tactical disadvantage. I scanned for alternate routes but found none feasible in these conditions. The creature had chosen its ambush point well. I drew my sidearm and proceeded with excruciating slowness, every sense heightened. Snow continued falling, limiting visibility to perhaps 50 yards. Wind masked subtle sounds, creating constant false alarms as branches cracked under accumulated snow weight. The whistling stopped. Somehow its absence proved more unnerving than its presence. The ravine narrowed to its tightest point, barely 20 feet between rock walls. Snow had drifted here, reaching mid-thigh, making movement laborious. I was halfway through when I spotted it. Not moving this time, standing perfectly still atop the southern outcropping, partially obscured by falling snow, watching my struggling progress. Even at 30 yards distance, its sheer size impressed upon me a primal fear. Standing upright, it easily reached 8 feet tall. Broad shoulders and barrel chest suggested immense strength. Dark fur, nearly black, provided perfect camouflage against the pine forest behind it. I raised my weapon, though shooting uphill through snow squalls promised poor accuracy. "Stay back," I shouted, voice nearly lost in the wind. It made no aggressive movement, simply observing my predicament with unsettling focus. Then, deliberately, it lifted something from beside its feet. My heart practically stopped. It held a hiking boot. Not mine, larger, male-sized. The boot looked relatively new but abandoned for some time. It turned the boot over in massive hands, examining it, then looked directly at me as if drawing connection between the footwear and my presence. A message. A warning, perhaps. Then it was moving, descending the outcropping with surprising grace for its bulk. Not directly toward me, but parallel, maintaining distance while clearly demonstrating its mobility advantage in this terrain. I pushed forward desperately, fighting through snowdrifts, maintaining constant visual contact with the creature. It paced me easily, never approaching closer than 20 yards, but never falling behind. The ravine finally widened, offering multiple route options. I chose the densest tree coverage, hoping to use the forest to my advantage. The creature followed, still parallel, still watching. This continued for over an hour. This bizarre escort through wilderness. It never approached, never threatened directly, yet never abandoned the pursuit. Occasionally, it would take routes requiring strength and agility impossible for humans, scaling near vertical rock faces, leaping across gaps between trees, demonstrating its supreme adaptation to this environment. 6 miles from Thunder Point, the weather worsened dramatically. Visibility dropped to mere feet as snow transitioned to whiteout conditions. Wind chill plummeted below dangerous thresholds. I could no longer maintain visual contact with the creature, though occasional whistling confirmed its continued presence. I needed shelter immediately or risked hypothermia. The emergency maps indicated a small natural cave system nearby, Hunter's Hollow, used occasionally by stranded hikers. I diverted course, fighting through near-blinding conditions. The cave mouth appeared suddenly, a dark gash in white landscape. I stumbled inside, collapsing against cold stone, shivering uncontrollably. The interior extended perhaps 30 feet, offering protection from wind but little warmth. I needed fire quickly. My hands shook violently as I gathered what meager dry materials I could find. The storm had left little untouched by moisture. I emptied emergency fire starters onto the pile, hands fumbling with matches. The third match caught, flames spreading tentatively through kindling. I huddled close, willing warmth into numb extremities. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. As feeling returned painfully to my fingers, awareness of vulnerability crashed over me. The cave had one entrance. I was effectively cornered. The whistling came again, from just outside the cave mouth. I grabbed my weapon, aiming toward the entrance. Snow swirled through the opening, nearly obscuring view of the outside world. Then a massive shadow blocked what little light remained. It stood there, framed perfectly in the cave entrance, snow accumulating on broad shoulders, observing me with that same unnerving intelligence. Neither predatory aggression nor fear showed in its posture, only intense curiosity. We remained frozen thus, locked in mutual observation. Minutes passed. My arm ached holding the weapon steady, but I dared not lower it. Then, with deliberate slowness, it placed something on the ground just inside the cave entrance. It straightened, regarded me one final time, then disappeared into the storm. Long minutes passed before I dared investigate. What I found stole my breath entirely. A freshly killed rabbit, and beside it, arranged with obvious intent, a small pile of dry twigs and bark, perfect kindling for my struggling fire. I stared at the offerings, mind struggling to process their implications. A dead rabbit, practical protein, dry kindling, essential survival material in these conditions, deliberate assistance from a creature I'd been taught to fear. The storm raged through the night, temperatures dropping dangerously low. Without the additional kindling, my fire would have died. Without the rabbit meat, hunger would have weakened me further. The creature, whatever it was, had quite possibly saved my life. Why? I huddled near the fire, weapon close but no longer clutched desperately. Outside, occasionally, came that distinctive whistling, distant now but present. Keeping watch? Standing guard? The uncertainty was maddening. By morning the storm had passed. Sunshine sparkled blindingly across fresh snow, at least 2 feet deep in places. The temperature remained brutally cold but climbing. I packed my gear with stiff fingers, preparing to complete the journey to Thunder Point. The cave entrance showed massive footprints, coming and going multiple times during the night. It had returned repeatedly, perhaps checking on me without entering. The implications sent my mind reeling. Stepping into harsh sunlight, I immediately spotted more tracks leading away from the cave, not toward Thunder Point but back toward my cabin. A clear invitation. Follow if you choose. Protocol dictated continuing to the emergency shelter. Logic demanded it. Yet something deeper pulled me toward those tracks. Understanding. The need to know. I hesitated only briefly before following the trail back toward my cabin. The journey proved surprisingly manageable. The tracks avoided the deepest drifts, taking advantage of natural windbreaks where snow accumulated less. It knew this terrain intimately, choosing optimal routes invisible to casual observation. I made better time following its path than I would have on established trails. Approaching my cabin clearing by mid-afternoon, I slowed, caution returning. The tracks led directly to my front door, then circled the structure repeatedly before disappearing into the tree line east of the lake. The cabin appeared undisturbed. Inside, everything remained exactly as I'd left it, including my departure note. Nothing taken, nothing disturbed. What had it wanted here? I rebuilt the cabin fire and attempted radio contact. To my surprise, communications had been restored. Station 17, this is Black Pine Lake. Do you copy? Black Pine Lake, we read you. Where have you been? 2 missed check-ins triggered protocol. I fabricated a partial truth. Storm-damaged communications. I attempted to reach Thunder Point shelter, but weather forced retreat. Search team was dispatched this morning. Should reach you by nightfall. Tell them to exercise extreme caution, I replied, then hesitated. What could I possibly report about what I'd witnessed? Who would believe me? Any situation we should be aware of? Station 17 pressed. Possible wildlife activity. Unusual tracks. Nothing confirmed. After signing off, I sat heavily in my chair, contemplating my next actions. Standard procedure required detailed incident reports. Photographic evidence existed on my camera, yet something held me back from full disclosure. The search team arrived at dusk. Two experienced rangers named Roscoe and Amala. They brought supplies, communications equipment, and obvious relief at finding me alive. "Nasty storm," Roscoe commented, warming hands by my fire. "3 hikers missing north of here. Search operation beginning tomorrow." "Missing?" The word hung ominously. "Failed to return from summit attempt on McPherson Peak. Last radio contact reported unusual wildlife activity." Amala noticed my reaction. "You've seen something too." It wasn't a question. I hesitated before retrieving my camera, showing them selected images of footprints in the broken tree. Not everything. Not the cave encounter or the offerings. Roscoe whistled low. "That's big, whatever it is. Bear walking peculiarly?" "Not a bear," I replied firmly. Amala, whose Yupik ancestry stretched back generations in these lands, studied the images carefully. My grandmother spoke of them, the hairy men, watchers in the forest. "Bigfoot," Roscoe supplied the common term, voice skeptical but not dismissive. "Whatever terminology you prefer," Amala continued, "stories persist across every native culture in these territories. Not malevolent creatures necessarily, but dangerous when threatened, territorial, intelligent." "You believe they exist?" Roscoe asked her. "I believe these forests hold secrets modern science hasn't catalogued," she replied carefully. "And I believe Denali's photos show something unusual." The conversation shifted to search plans for the missing hikers. I volunteered immediately, knowing what they potentially faced. If the creature had helped me, perhaps it had similarly assisted the lost hikers, or perhaps there were multiple creatures with different intentions. We departed at first light, heading northwest toward McPherson Peak. Fresh snow made tracking difficult but not impossible. 6 miles in, we found the first anomaly, a shelter constructed from branches and pine boughs, clearly fashioned by human hands but reinforced with techniques no basic wilderness training would include. Inside, remnants of food, a shredded backpack and boot tracks matching 3 individuals. "They survived the storm here," Roscoe concluded, examining the shelter's construction. "But where did they go after?" The answer came in tracks leading northwest, not just the hikers' boots but accompanied by those now familiar massive footprints, sometimes paralleling, sometimes intersecting. "They're being followed," I said, stomach tightening. "Or led," Amala countered, studying the pattern. "These prints sometimes come before the boot tracks, not after." We followed the trail through increasingly rugged terrain, areas no casual hiker would typically navigate. The pattern became clear. When the hiker's path would have led toward danger, unstable ice, hidden crevasses, avalanche zones, the larger tracks intervened, diverting their course toward safer passage. 5 miles further, we heard voices, human voices, calling for help. We rushed forward to find the 3 hikers alive but stranded on a rock outcropping above a newly formed ice chasm. The storm had collapsed their planned return route. During rescue and medical assessment, the hiker's story emerged in fragments. "Something followed us for days," the group leader explained while Imanala treated his frostbitten fingers. "Massive. We only saw it clearly once, in the storm. It brought us firewood," the second hiker added. "Left a dead fox near our shelter." The third remained silent, traumatized by the experience, until I gently asked, "Did it whistle? A sound like wind through teeth?" His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You've heard it too." The return journey to Ranger headquarters allowed full debriefing. Official reports documented unusual wildlife activity and survival assistance from unidentified source. My photographic evidence was logged but classified. Standard procedure for potentially sensitive ecological discoveries. Supervisor Morrison called me to her office after debriefing concluded. "You're not the first," she said without preamble, retrieving a file from her locked cabinet. "Every few years we get reports, footprints, sightings, inexplicable assistance rendered to lost hikers." The file contained dozens of photographs spanning decades, footprints identical to those I documented. Broken trees, shelters of suspicious construction. "Why isn't this public knowledge?" I asked. "What would you have us say? That folklore creatures patrol our forests, occasionally rescuing lost humans? The scientific community would crucify us. The public would either panic or flood the parks, seeking encounters." She closed the file deliberately. "We document, we observe, we protect, both the public and whatever shares these forests with us." What are they? I finally asked the question directly. Morrison shrugged. A species undocumented by science, remnant population of some prehistoric hominid, or exactly what native traditions have always claimed, beings sharing our world but existing just beyond our understanding. I don't know. She fixed me with a serious gaze. But I do know they were here long before us, and they'll remain long after. Their territory, their rules. We're just visitors. I returned to Black Pine Lake Station 2 weeks later. The cabin seemed different somehow. Not threatening, but not entirely mine either. Shared space. That first night back, I left a small offering on my porch. Smoked salmon, a regional delicacy. By morning it was gone. In its place lay a perfectly formed arrowhead, chipped from obsidian with expert precision. Some nights I still hear whistling from the forest edge. I don't fear it anymore. Out here in the vastness, boundaries between legends and reality blur. Ancient knowledge and modern understanding collide. The wilderness teaches humility to those willing to learn. I came to Alaska seeking escape but found perspective instead. In these remote forests exist things science cannot yet explain and may never fully understand. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be.